Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. The committee is meeting today to receive testimony on worldwide threats to the homeland 20 years after 9/11. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Good morning. I want to thank Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and National Counterterrorism Center Director Christine Amazad for coming before the committee today and for your service to the country. This month, Americans observed the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. We will never forget the heroic first responders who ran into the Twin Towers to save others, the brave Flight 93 passengers who fought back against the hijackers, or the service members killed at their post in the Pentagon. We remember all of those who lost their lives or their loved ones on 9/11, and those who have suffered ground zero related health effects in the days since. This committee was created in the aftermath of the attacks, and earlier this month we met on hallowed ground in New York to mark the 20th anniversary. We visited the 9/11 Memorial and Museum and laid a wreath in remembrance. We met in One World Trade Center with first responders to discuss how far we've come in the last 2 decades and what more remains to be done to secure our nation while upholding our American values. Today, the committee is meeting to examine worldwide threats to the homeland 20 years after 9/11. It is the committee's longstanding practice to meet annually with national security leaders to discuss the global threat landscape and the U.S. response. This year especially, we reflect on the incredible transformation of our national security apparatus and expansion of the Homeland Security enterprise over the last 2 decades. We recognize the success we've had in preventing another 9/11 style attack, but are sobered by the challenges posed by long-standing and emerging Homeland Security threats. Some of these threats include the recent rise in domestic terrorism, more frequent cyber attacks from increasingly sophisticated actors, and the security implications of the Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan. With respect to domestic terrorism, our witnesses have testified before this committee previously about the grave nature of the threat. Secretary Mayorkas called it the greatest threat in the homeland. I hope to hear from the panel today about their current domestic terrorism threat assessment in the wake of the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Regarding cybersecurity, over the past year, we've seen our adversaries burrow into federal networks through a sophisticated supply chain attack, exploit one-day vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange servers, and refuse to rein in cyber criminals working to extort millions of dollars from U.S. critical infrastructure owners and operators through ransomware attacks. I commend the administration for its sustained commitment to securing federal networks and making the federal government a more valuable security partner in the private sector. We still have a long way to go. I'm interested to learn today about how DHS and FBI coordinate as they execute their shared cybersecurity missions. Regarding Afghanistan, this committee has been and will continue to engage on threats to the homeland emanating from Afghanistan, while recognizing that the terror threat has metastasized across the world in the last 2 decades. We are conducting careful oversight of U.S. efforts to screen and resettle our Afghan allies in this country and will continue to do so. Finally, I want to address the situation at the southern border. The Biden administration inherited an immigration system badly broken by the previous administration. Trump's cruel policies led to families being separated and children dying in custody. Those immoral policies did not represent who we are as a people. and the Biden administration was right to reject them. I've spoken with Secretary Mayorkas on a regular basis about the border, and even more frequently in recent days as events unfolded in Del Rio, Texas. The administration has committed to enforce the laws and processing migrants in a safe, orderly, and humane manner, and this committee will hold the administration to its commitment. Finally, I want to say a word to the men and women working to secure the homeland. Their jobs have never been easy, and they are particularly difficult right now with the COVID-19 pandemic and worsening natural disasters caused by climate change threatening their health, disrupting travel, and diverting homeland security resources. Please know that this committee greatly appreciates those working on the front lines and behind the scenes to secure the homeland on behalf of the American people. As we learned in 9/11, nothing short of a well-coordinated whole of government effort will protect the nation against urgent evolving threats. 20 years on, the Committee on Homeland Security remains committed to working with federal, state, and local partners on that critical effort. Again, I thank our witnesses for joining us today and the members for their participation. With that, I recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. I'm pleased that the committee is holding this very important hearing as the United States finds itself facing increasingly dire threats on a number of fronts impacting our homeland security. From the Biden administration's chaotic and deadly withdrawal process in Afghanistan to the ongoing humanitarian and security crisis along our southwest border, to the unprecedented cyber threats facing our American way of life, the American people are deeply troubled by what they are seeing. These threats are, of course, all happening in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, in which clarity from the administration related to vaccine boosters has been absent, similar to the Department of Homeland Security's mitigation of the pandemic at the southwest border, as was recently confirmed by the DHS Inspector General's office. What is most troubling to me is the overwhelming lack of accountability this administration is willing to accept. Nearly 10 months after President Biden's inauguration, the prevailing narrative coming from the administration's political class continues to be one which blames the last administration for the current administration's shortcomings. This is just tired, and it's inaccurate, and these talking points have been repeated consistently alongside scenes of Americans and Afghan allies being left under Taliban rule, and all while known terrorist operatives were inaugurated into the Taliban's cabinet on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Let me repeat that. Known terrorist operatives were inaugurated into the Taliban's cabinet on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. That is significant. But that is not the only crisis where the Biden administration's blame game shows up. What we also hear when officials blame the last administration for the deadly and increasingly untenable crisis along our southern border. Last month, we saw the sixth straight month of more than 170,000 encounters along the southwest border, a trend that has never been recorded before. These numbers are part of the overall 1.5 million illegal border encounters that have occurred just this fiscal year. While the recently departed border chief is on record stating that known or suspected terrorists are crossing the border at, quote, a level we have never seen before, end quote, this administration continues to avoid the American people's demand for transparency. This issue hits home for me. This year, my district in central New York has seen a very big increase in opioid-related deaths. This trend is repeated in communities across the country, proving that in 2021, every state truly is a border state. Customs and Border Protection has seized more than twice the amount of lethal fentanyl this year compared to last year, and that's just what we seized, and more than 3 times more than in 2019. We all know that for everything we interdict, more is flowing undetected into American communities as the drug cartels exploit the administration's failings. On the issue of cybersecurity, the American people are facing unprecedented threats to their livelihood, their privacy, and their overall way of life. And this year alone, we've seen a number of high-profile attacks aimed at America's critical infrastructure, leading to important conversations in Congress around the merits of incident reporting and identifying systemically important and critical infrastructure. 2 issues I would like to hear the panel's thoughts on today. Last but certainly not least is the rapidly increasing challenges facing the homeland from adversarial nation states overseas, namely China. As the Chinese Communist Party aims to undermine the United States at every turn, I see aggressive moves on Beijing's part to increase its investments in the Western Hemisphere. Threats posed by China underpin supply chain security challenges that are leading this country into new economic security oversight efforts. I recently traveled to New York City with a number of my colleagues to observe the 20th anniversary of the terrorist attacks on 9/11, and I thank the chairman once again for making that happen. As we spoke with individuals at NYPD and the FDNY, two things became clear. First, that our first responders and law enforcement are true heroes on the front lines of our homeland security, risking their lives every day to protect the American people. And secondly, that these same first responders are troubled by what they see. I heard many accounts concerning how troubled our frontline law enforcement is about the homeland security implications of Al Qaeda and ISIS having a safe haven in Afghanistan once again, along with consequences in their communities stemming from the porous southern border. These threats, combined with low morale and retention caused by the shameful defund the police movement, is putting American communities at greater risk at a time when we can least afford it. Today, I hope to hear solutions rather than talking points from our panelists, who each play a truly critical role in securing the U.S. homeland. I'm grateful to each one of them for their service to this country in these trying times, and I look forward to working with them in our efforts on behalf of the American people. But make no mistake about it, it's very, very frustrating right now, especially with respect to the southern border. And I will pull no punches, and neither will my colleagues when it comes to that. And I'm looking forward to having this discussion today. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Other members of the committee are reminded that under committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. Members are also reminded that the committee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in our February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. I welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is the Honorable Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security. Our next witness is the Honorable Christopher Wray, the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Our third and final witness is the Honorable Christine Abizag, Director of the National Counterterrorism Center in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Without objection, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now ask Secretary Mayorkas to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, and distinguished members of this committee, good morning, and thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the threat landscape facing our homeland 20 years after 9/11, alongside my colleagues from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the National Counterterrorism Center. Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, I may ask for a minute more of time. I do want to address the images that emanated from Del Rio, Texas, over the last several days, and correctly and necessarily were met with our nation's horror, because they do not reflect who we are as a country, nor do they reflect who the United States Customs and Border Protection is. I want to share with you, with Ranking Member Katko, and this entire committee, the fact that we are addressing this with tremendous speed and with tremendous force. I have ordered an investigation to be conducted of the events that are captured in those images. The Office of Professional Responsibilities leaders are conducting the investigation. We have ensured that the individuals during the pendency of the investigation are not conducting law enforcement duties to interact with migrants, but rather are conducting only administrative duties. I have informed through the appropriate channels our Office of Inspector General. The facts will drive the actions that we take. We ourselves will pull no punches, and we need to conduct this investigation thoroughly, but very quickly. It will be completed in days and not weeks, and I wanted to assure this committee and you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Ranking Member, of that fact. During the past few weeks, I have attended numerous events to remember the tragic assault on our democracy that occurred on 9/11. Each commemoration was a powerful reminder of why we serve, in memory of those whom we lost and in pursuit of our noble mission to protect the homeland. Today, we face a diverse and evolving threat landscape that includes domestic and international terrorism, malicious cyber activities, an ongoing global pandemic, transnational crime, climate change, and more. Through the extraordinary talent and dedication of the more than 250,000 individuals who comprise our department, we are meeting the challenge to protect our homeland and keep our communities safe. Every day, our department's personnel make tremendous sacrifices to achieve this mission. I would like to take a moment to describe the major threats facing our country today and the work we are doing to combat them. First, we have built a multi-layered security and screening and vetting architecture to combat the evolving terrorist threat. We remain ever vigilant in protecting the homeland from foreign terrorists seeking to do us harm, the very reason for the department's creation, while combating the most significant and persistent terrorism-related threat facing our country today, which stems from both homegrown and domestic violent extremists who are inspired by a broad range of ideological motivations. To meet this challenge, DHS has established a dedicated domestic terrorism branch within our Office of Intelligence and Analysis, launched the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships to provide communities with evidence-based tools and resources to address early risk factors, and redoubled our efforts to share timely and actionable information and intelligence with our partners across every level of government. This year, for the first time, we designated combating domestic violent extremism as a national priority area in FEMA grant programs, resulting in at least $77 million being spent on capabilities to detect and protect against these threats in communities nationwide. Second, as cyber threats have grown, so have our efforts to increase our nation's cybersecurity resilience and protect our critical infrastructure. Ransomware incidents are on the rise. Last year, victims paid an estimated $350 million in ransoms, a 311% increase over the prior year, with the average payment exceeding $300,000. In July, DHS launched StopRansomware.gov to help private and public organizations of all sizes combat ransomware and adopt cybersecurity best practices. Our experts at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, stood up the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative to bring together partners from every level of government and the private sector to reduce cyber risks. To better protect our critical infrastructure, TSA recently issued 2 new security directives to strengthen the cybersecurity and resilience of our nation's pipelines. CISA and our Office of Intelligence and Analysis are also working with all 50 states, local jurisdictions, and election technology experts to keep our elections secure. To further lead the way, we are building a top-tier cybersecurity workforce by investing in the development of diverse talent pipelines and building the expertise to keep addressing changing threats. Third, we continue making risk-based investments to keep our borders secure, including from threats posed by transnational criminal organizations. We are collaborating with our international partners to disrupt these groups, combat their illicit activities like drug trafficking and human smuggling, and hold accountable those with ties to their logistical operations while streamlining multinational cooperation on investigations and prosecutions. Fourth, DHS continues to support nationwide efforts to combat the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. FEMA has helped stand up more than 800 community vaccination centers, including almost 200 mobile sites, to more equitably increase access to COVID-19 vaccines across vulnerable and rural populations. The Transportation Security Administration acted to protect the health of the traveling public and transportation personnel by implementing a federal mask mandate at airports, on commercial aircraft, and in various modes of surface transportation. Meanwhile, the U.S. Secret Service and Immigration and Customs Enforcement have partnered with other federal agencies to protect Americans from COVID-19 related fraud and criminal activity, including by preventing more than $3 billion of much-needed COVID-19 relief from fraudulently ending up in the pockets of criminals. Finally, we are countering the current and growing existential threat posed by climate change. Hurricane Ida was just the latest manifestation of a devastating reality. Natural disasters rising in intensity and destructive reach. However, this threat is not new, nor is it unique to any region. To help communities recover and remain resilient, President Biden doubled the size of the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, pouring $1 billion into wildfire resilience efforts, flood control initiatives, and much more. DHS also authorized nearly $3.5 billion in hazard mitigation grant program funding to help states, tribes, and territories adapt and prepare for the impacts of the climate crisis. FEMA revised its policies to overcome historic inequities in its aid programs and ensure a fairer and more equitable distribution of assistance to minority, low-income, and other disenfranchised communities. 2 decades after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security remains focused on protecting our country from evolving threats. We can execute this critical mission because of our incredible workforce and because of our key partners, the members of this committee, our counterparts abroad, the private sector, non-governmental organizations, and local communities. We will remain vigilant, resilient, and agile. We will do so to continue countering the threats of today and of the next 20 years. Thank you for your leadership and continued support. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I now ask Director Ray to summarize this statement. I know it might be a little more than 5 minutes, but we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and to Ranking Member Katko and members of the committee. I'm honored to be here today to discuss the many threats facing our homeland. A week and a half ago, we marked a somber, really sacred anniversary in this country, the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. September 11th reminds us of evil and loss, the nearly 3,000 victims taken from us that day and from their families. It also, though, reminds us of sacrifice and selflessness, of common purpose. It reminds us of the first responders and everyday heroes we lost that day, and all those who suffered illness as a result of their selfless work after the attacks, including members of our FBI family. And still, 2 decades later, our response to September 11th and the lessons learned from those attacks drive our approach to combating all the many threats Americans face today. It was 9/11, after all, that turned the FBI into an agency focused on disrupting threats and to building deeper and even more effective partnerships, both here at home and around the world. And good thing we made those changes, because as we'll discuss this morning, there's no shortage of dangers to defend against. Just a flavor before we even get to terrorism, on the cyber front, we're now investigating over 100 different types of ransomware, each of them with scores of victims. And that's on top of hundreds of other criminal and national security cyber threats that we're working against every day. In our violent crime work, we recently arrested over 600 gang members in a single month. That's just 1 month. Protecting our nation's innovation, we're opening a new China counterintelligence investigation every 12 hours. And every day, we receive thousands of tips to our National Threat Operations Center, many of which require imminent action against threats to life. That list goes on, and I'm not going to have time to discuss most of them before we get started, but I do want to spend a few minutes on terrorism and the challenges facing those protecting us against it. Preventing terrorist attacks remains our top priority both now and for the foreseeable future. Today, the greatest terrorist threat we face here in the US is from what are in effect lone actors. Because they act alone and move quickly from radicalization to action, often using easily obtainable weapons against soft targets, these attackers don't leave a lot of dots for investigators to connect or time in which to connect them. We continue to see individuals here at home inspired by jihadist ideologies espoused by foreign terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al Qaeda, what we would call homegrown violent extremists. But we're also countering lone domestic violent extremists, radicalized by personalized grievances ranging from racial or ethnic bias to anti-authority or anti-government sentiment to conspiracy theories. There is no doubt about it, today's threat is different from what it was 20 years ago, and it'll most certainly continue to change. So to stay in front of it, we've got to adapt too. That's why over the last year and a half, the FBI has pushed even more resources to our domestic terrorism investigations. Since the spring of 2020, so about 16, 17 months ago, we've more than doubled our domestic terrorism caseload from about 1,000 to around 2,700 investigations. And we've surged personnel to match, more than doubling the number of people working the threat from a year before. But we're also surging against threats by foreign terrorist organizations like ISIS, Al Qaeda, and Al Shabaab. Their operatives continue to search for vulnerabilities and have not stopped trying to carry out large-scale attacks against us. And we are certainly watching the evolving situation in Afghanistan. Now, 9/11 was 20 years ago, but for us at the FBI, as I know it does for my colleagues testifying here with me today, it represents a danger that we focus on every single day. And make no mistake, the danger is real. Our adversaries are committed, and they're working to succeed just once while we're working to bat 1,000. So we're working side by side with our partners to identify and stop would-be attackers before they act. Just within the past couple of years, we've thwarted potential terrorist attacks in areas like Las Vegas, Tampa, New York, Cleveland, Kansas City, Miami, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere. Now, we're proud of our successes, but we need to stay on the balls of our feet, relentlessly vigilant against the next plot by our adversaries and their next attempts to attack us. Our workforce has been battling the threat of terrorism and every other threat we face right through the teeth of a pandemic and rising danger to their own safety. And I add that last part because over the past year, we've seen a sharp and deeply disturbing uptick in violence against the law enforcement community. In just the first 8 months of this year, 52 law enforcement officers have been feloniously killed on the job. To put that into context, that's an officer murdered every 5 days. And that's more than all of 2020. And of course, that doesn't even count all those who've died in the line of duty facing the many other inherent dangers of this job, much less the scores of officers, agents, analysts, and other dedicated professionals who lost their lives to COVID-19. We will be forever indebted for their bravery and their sacrifice and are determined to honor them all through the way we do our work while we remain focused on our ultimate mission, protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. And thank you for taking the time to hear from me today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Now I ask Director Abazad to summarize her statement for 5 minutes or whatever you're required. Director.
Thank you very much, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, and distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the global counterterrorism environment and to highlight the tireless work of NCTC professionals and IC professionals across the board who are working to protect our homeland. As noted in my statement for the record, 20 years after 9/11, the United States faces a changed threat from foreign terrorist organizations. The threat today is less acute to the homeland, but it continues to become more ideologically diffuse and geographically diverse. The United States continues to have success at degrading foreign terrorists' operations, including those directed at the homeland, though these terrorists have also proven adaptive over years of CT pressure. Their presence has spread to countries that are often undergoverned and which offer a permissive operating environment that can be easily exploited, requiring constant vigilance on the part of the intelligence community as we monitor for threats. Turning first to the international counterterrorism landscape. The 26 August suicide bombing by ISIS Khorasan at the international airport in Kabul, which tragically killed 13 US service members and scores of Afghans, illustrates that these groups continue to place a premium on attacks against the United States. ISIS-Core in Iraq and Syria maintains a strategic interest in attacks in the West, even as it remains committed to the long-term goal of establishing an Islamic caliphate. It is fomenting sectarian discord and exploiting security gaps in Iraq and Syria to create conditions favorable for seizing territory again. For its part, Al-Qaeda has changed significantly since 9/11. The group and its affiliates and allies have repeatedly demonstrated their ability to adapt to changing CT environments, and part of this adaptation has included shifting from its core leadership in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region to a more geographically dispersed network of affiliates and veteran leaders across Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. While years of CT pressure has degraded the Al-Qaeda network, the group and its affiliates remain intent on using individuals with access to the United States to conduct attacks. This was most recently demonstrated by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula's probable approval of a 2019 attack in Pensacola, Florida, where a Saudi Air Force officer killed 3 and wounded 8 US service members. Now, here in the United States, the primary threat in the homeland comes from individuals inspired to violence, either by foreign terrorists or by motivations more domestic in nature. US-based homegrown violent extremists, HVEs, are largely inspired by Al-Qaeda or ISIS and will likely continue to attempt attacks because of their personal and ideological grievances, their attraction to foreign terrorist messaging, and their access to weapons and targets. One of the most pressing terrorist threats to the homeland also comes from domestic violent extremists, DVEs, in particular racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists and militia violent extremists, who often mobilize to violence independent of direction from a formal organization. Since 2015, the threat from these individuals has increased, and since 2018, DVEs have posed the most lethal threat inside the homeland. We assess that DVEs will continue to pose a heightened threat in the coming years. We also remain vigilant against Iran, its MOIS and Quds Force agents, and its proxies, principally Lebanese Hezbollah, but also the Iraqi Shia militants it is allied with in the region. We remain concerned about plotting against the United States for the January 2020 killing of former IRGC Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani. And we face an increasing number of indirect fire and unmanned aerial systems attacks against US facilities in Iraq, especially over the last several months. Now, looking ahead, we will continue to face a diverse range of threats that play out against the backdrop of complex global trends, including the ongoing effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, great power competition, the disruptive effects of a changing climate, and rapidly evolving technology. More than 17 years after its establishment, the National Counterterrorism Center is uniquely positioned to lead in this moment, alongside our partners in the FBI and DHS, as we move into the next phase of the counterterrorism fight. We will continue to discover, analyze, and warn about ongoing and future threats as part of a broader set of foreign policy challenges that the United States will face in the 21st century. We will continue finding innovative ways to synthesize, manage, and exploit our unique access to terrorism data across a spectrum of sources to identify threats that might otherwise go unnoticed. We mark the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, recognizing the remarkable CT successes of the last 2 decades, and with great gratitude to the military, law enforcement, diplomatic, and intelligence professionals who have made them possible. Working together, we have succeeded in preventing another major 9/11 style attack on the homeland. But we must not be complacent. NCTC and the larger intelligence community must continue to collaborate and maintain the ability to innovate to stay ahead of the next evolution of the threat. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
This is for that testimony. I remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the witnesses. I'll now recognize myself for questions. Director Ray, you testified before this committee 2 years ago that domestic terrorism threats were the most concerning terrorism threats in terms of lethality. More recently, you testified that the threats of domestic terrorism is metastasizing. Secretary Mayorkas, you testified before us earlier this year that domestic violent extremism represents the greatest threat in the homeland right now. Despite these acknowledgments, it appears that warning signs were disregarded or the domestic terrorism threat was not prioritized appropriately in the lead up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Director Ray and Secretary Mayorkas, what is your current assessment of threats posed by domestic terrorists to the homeland?
I'd be very pleased, Mr. Chairman, to answer that at the outset. We in the Department of Homeland Security, of course, with our partners across the federal government and state and local law enforcement, consider domestic violent extremism to be the most prominent terrorism-related threat to the homeland right now. I think our response in anticipation of what could have materialized on September 18th demonstrates the lessons learned from the January 6th insurrection. We gathered a great deal of intelligence and information from public-facing sources, as well as leveraging academic and other third-party institutions. We disseminated that information and intelligence to state, local, tribal, and territorial partners. We focused on the National Capital Region, and we were far more prepared should anything have materialized on September 18th than was previously the case, Mr. Chairman.
Director Ray?
Director Ray? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I would say a few things. First, starting back in June of 2019, I elevated racially and ethically motivated violent extremism to a national threat priority, which is our highest threat priority level. And I think that has already shown fruits in the fact that we have effectively doubled the number of domestic terrorism investigations and arrests since that time. We had about 180 domestic terrorism arrests last year. We've had over 600 now in connection with January 6th alone. I would say that we have also created a domestic terrorism hate crimes fusion cell to help increase the level of intelligence and information flow that goes out. Certainly from a lethality perspective, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, we have seen those kinds of domestic violent extremists responsible for the most lethal activity over recent years, although I would add that in 2020, we saw a significant uptick in lethal action and violence by anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists to go along with the racially motivated violent extremists. And from a perspective of pushing out intelligence, as we did before January 6th, we've been pushing out dozens of intelligence products to our federal, state, and local partners to highlight the threat.
Thank you much. Director Ray, Congress passed the Data Act. And as you know, we have been trying to make sure that the FBI produce information on domestic terrorism in a manner that not just members of Congress, but the public at large can understand what's going on. We finally got a report subject to the NDAA legislation, but there's still some gaps in terms of data missing from 2009 to 2019. Can you commit to helping close those data gaps in that report so that members of Congress and the public at large can have the understanding necessary about the growing problem with domestic terrorism in this country?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, you can count on us to work with you and your staff and the committee staff to try to produce more information, to be more responsive to those requests. Certainly, as I understand it, some of the information requested, and this gets overly involved for this setting, involves information that at least wasn't maintained in earlier years in the form that would be, I think, most useful. So we're trying to work through that with your staff. And certainly I recognize that the earlier report took longer to get to you than it should have. Some of that, in all fairness, was in part due to the pandemic and the fact that the people that we really needed to rely on for that work were both strained by the pandemic, but also working on the significant domestic terrorism caseload that, as I testified a few minutes ago, mushroomed last year. So we're going to work with you, and we will try to see if we can get you more complete information.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes as a ranking member of the full committee, gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Director Ray, it's nice to see you again, and I appreciate your service to your country and your candor. Just a very brief question, because I got a lot of questions from Secretary Mayorkas. Does the situation in Afghanistan give you a concern about the possibility of terrorist networks reconstituting there and, in effect, trying to incite violence in the homeland?
Yes, actually, there are a number of reasons why we're concerned, and recognizing the time, I'll just tick them off real quickly. One, we are, of course, concerned that there will be an opportunity for a safe haven to be recreated there, which is certainly something that we've seen in the past, and allowing foreign terrorist organizations to operate more freely in the region. We're concerned that ISIS-K can take advantage of a significantly weakened security environment to operate more freely. We're also concerned that the events there can serve as a catalyst or an inspiration for terrorists, whether they be members of FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations, or homegrown violent extremists, to conduct attacks. And then, most importantly, we're concerned that foreign terrorist organizations will have an opportunity to reconstitute, plot, inspire in a space that's much harder for us to collect intelligence and operate against than was the case previously.
Well, thank you very much, and I wish I had more time to spend with you on this, but perhaps a cup of coffee or breakfast soon is in order, so I can talk to you more about that. Secretary Mayorkas, I want to commend you on many of the things that you've done at Homeland Security since you've been there, particularly in the cybersecurity area. The people that are appointed to leadership positions are doing a tremendous job, and we have a very difficult task ahead of us. And as you know, and as Chairman Thompson knows, I pride myself on being one of the most bipartisan members of Congress, and one who is hopefully seen as a gentleman. But I got to tell you, Secretary Mayorkas, there's one major problem that I have, and I've just got to unburden myself with it, and that is the southern border. I started my career as a federal organized crime prosecutor in the southern border, and I spent my adult life trying to keep this country safe. And what's happening at the southern border is absolutely out of control. And you and the administration have repeatedly referred to this border situation as a quote unquote rebuild. You need to rebuild the border. Well, let me, some things I'm just wondering about. Is rebuilding the border having an unprecedented level of aliens seized at the border over the last 6 months? more than 170,000 a month over the last 6 months? Is rebuilding the border releasing many individuals, tens of thousands, into our communities without vaccinations for COVID? Is rebuilding our border not testing people in Customs and Border Protection custody for COVID because you don't have the facilities to keep them there? Is rebuilding our border allowing more aliens to die in custody this year than in any time in recent memory? And as a matter of fact, in 2018, 6 people died in custody. 2019, 11. 2020, 13. This year, that number is quadrupled to 51. Is that rebuilding our immigration system? Let me ask you, is rebuilding our immigration system allowing cartels to get fentanyl across our border in record numbers? There's been more fentanyl seized this year than all of last year, and last year was a record number. And the fentanyl seized this year is enough to kill every man, woman, and child in the United States 6 times over. And many of those deaths have reached my doorstep in Onondaga County, where 45 people in the first half of this year died of heroin overdoses laced with fentanyl. That's just my one county, and what's going on across the country. And I guess the other thing too is the number of known and suspected terrorists seized at the border this year, caught, not the ones that got away, caught at the border this year, it obviously is an unprecedented numbers, and you know that, and I know that. Is that rebuilding our immigration system? Is it? So you come to the inescapable conclusion from a letter from September 11th from a career Customs and Border Patrol agent who was running Customs and Border Patrol, Rodney Scott, who said, quote, "In my professional assessment, the U.S. Border Patrol is rapidly losing the situational awareness required to know who and what is entering our homeland." He goes on to say, amongst many other things, it is important to remember that the border is not the destination, but only a transit port en route to cities and towns throughout the United States, and that these gaps in the border are exploited to easily smuggle contraband, criminals, or even potential terrorists in the United States. Now, this is not from some political hack that's appointee by the Trump administration. This is from somebody who served 29 years under 5 different presidents. And so to me, it is unbelievable what is going on at the border. And now we have the deflection about saying Haitians and the border is closed. And now we know the border is not closed because the Haitians some Haitians are being sent home, some are being sent here, and we don't know what their distinction is. And that's good. That goes for every other type of person coming across the border as well. So, Mr. Chairman, before I ask one simple question of Secretary Mayorkas, I ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record, September 11th, 2021 letter from Rodney Scott. I'm
Without
sorry, sir.
objection. Without objection.
Thank you very much. Now, one very simple
Gentleman's
question.
time has expired, but we'd be happy to let the secretary answer some of the questions you presented.
Well, it's one of the questions you can answer, Mr. Chairman, also that I was going to ask is why the actual number of known suspected terrorists seized at the border is considered law enforcement sensitive. We're not asking about the details, just that simple number. We asked for that information August 10th, and we still haven't got it.
Ranking Member Katko, you and I have discussed the southern border, and I respectfully disagree with a number of the statements that precede your question. I should also say that I have tremendous confidence not only in the United States Border Patrol, but in its new leader, Raul Ortiz, who is a 3-decade veteran of law enforcement and the United States Border Patrol. And so I look forward to discussing more with you some of the statements that precede your question. We are indeed addressing security at the border. We are exercising and enforcing both the laws of enforcement, the laws of accountability, and the humanitarian laws that this country and this Congress have enacted and recognized. Thank you.
Chair will now recognize other members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I will recognize members in the order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority. Members are reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questioning, and to then mute themselves once they've finished speaking, and to leave their cameras on so they may be visible to the chair. The chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Ranking Member, and let me express my appreciation very quickly to all of the men and women represented before us and all of your teams and the entire team that have provided us with a safe journey post 9/11 as it relates to international threats coming to the United States. We have not had that kind of attack. My time is short, and I'd appreciate your quick response. To Director Abizad, can you provide me with the interaction and the potential of a new ally and friend or an expanded ally and friend with Pakistan in light of the circumstances with Afghanistan and the potential rise of ISIS? Are we looking to use assets and collaborate as relates to domestic security? And my time is short. Would you give me a brief answer, please?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Pakistan has been a longtime CT partner. It is a complicated partner given some of the dynamics in the region, but we will absolutely look to collaborate with them on CT, whether emanating from Afghanistan, Pakistan, or elsewhere in the region, consistent with our shared interests.
Thank you. You've been eloquent, Director Ray, on advising us about domestic terrorism. I would like to get in writing again the protocols that you put in place post the January 6th very devastating insurrection attack against democracy, and I'd prefer to have that in writing to the committee and directed to me as well. Let me indicate that many of us know that your responsibilities for national security is large. And so as I think of Ali Rassman, Simone Biles, Michaela Maroney, and Maggie Nichols, they deserve the protection of the United States and the attention of the FBI. I know that you provided an apology, but as well, I also noted in the testimony of these young women, Simone Biles from Texas, all of them contributing to the national pride, if you will, throughout their lives, indicated that they had seen no prosecutions, no extensive investigations. My time is short and I have questions for the Secretary. What is your singular comment about moving forward on further investigations of agents who ignored these young women and caused additional harm and violence against them and other athletes?
So thank you for the question. As I said last week, I consider what happened, or what more importantly did not happen back in 2015 at the FBI to be totally unacceptable. And I am deeply sorry on behalf of the entire FBI for what happened there. We have fired the one individual featured prominently in the report that we could fire. As far as prosecutions go, sorry, it's just a second, please. As far as prosecutions go, as you may know, that's really the responsibility of the Department of Justice, not the FBI. We have done what we have the power to do. So I would refer you really to the department on the latter part.
Thank you. Will you be presenting a case or information to the DOJ for them to go further?
Well, on that issue, the Inspector General, as you may know, took over the investigation. So it's really a conversation between the Inspector General and the Justice Department. If we can be helpful in that regard, and that's appropriate, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you so very much. I'll pursue that. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your heart and as well your commitment to serving the United States. I think the narrative about immigration is so wrong. First of all, the southern border is 1,954 miles. It is not out of control. Thank you to those who are protecting it. I have many people who acknowledge that. They quickly raised the point that we should refrain from these kinds of accusatory attacks against migrants. We are a nation of laws and immigrants. And so let me first of all raise the question of the terrible scenes that are all over the internet now, and also the mockery of Haitians who are taking water or washing in the water. First of all, how much did race play a part in these actions? Are you looking into that as well? And also, have you considered this Trump relic of Title 42, not eliminating, but a suspension of it in light of the fact that Haitians have been determined to be no national security threat? There are Haitians in my district right now, migrants who have come from NGOs on the border. We welcome them. I will be visiting them over the weekend. But I want to know how we can do better in this particular instance. You've answered all the other questions of asylum opportunities, the opportunities for them to be taken by sponsors or family members, which they have. We can do better. I know you want to do better. Can you give me those answers? Thank you.
Congresswoman, thank you very much. The investigation is going to be all encompassing. We're not going to cut a single corner or compromise any element of thoroughness. It will be a sweeping investigation, number one. Number two, with respect to Title 42 and its exercise, that is an authority of the Centers for Disease Control. It is not a matter of immigration policy. It is a matter of public health policy driven by the situation of COVID-19 and where the trajectory of that pandemic is. It is based on the data that CDC analyzes, and it is a CDC order that determines the applicability of the Title 42 authority.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding this hearing today to discuss worldwide threats to the homeland as we move beyond the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Americans watching this hearing today are wondering why the focus of our narrative is not on the obvious threats as we look at the immediate future of our nation and the security of our homeland, being the threat of jihadist terror coming into our country due to the abhorrent failure in Afghanistan and the disintegration of our southern border. Our national sovereignty has been lost at the southern border. We've been invaded. My colleagues refer to scenes on the internet. You don't have to look very far to see imagery that none of us have ever seen in our lives. I'm 60 years old. I've never seen anything like this in America. And you know, we have witnesses before us. With all due respect, good Lord, step away from your talking points and let us share truth as Americans. After the Biden administration's disgraceful retreat from Afghanistan, the Pentagon is actively warning Congress of the increased likelihood of terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. That's a fact. Regardless, this committee's recent markup of the Democrats' $3.5 trillion reconciliation monstrosity bill didn't include a single dime for counterterrorism efforts, despite these warnings. And Republican amendments to attempt to correct that were voted down by party line vote by Democrats with the majority control. Further, during this time, the security crisis at our own southern border has gotten worse and worse. We didn't think it could get worse, but it has. And we have witnesses that consistently stick to these talking points, like Baghdad Bob saying there's nothing wrong here. Move along, and America is wondering exactly when will Congress embrace the truth and have honest discussion of the actual threats to our homeland on the Homeland Security Committee. We've had 170,000 documented interactions. Now, based upon known formulas of estimated, what are referred to as gotaways. This means you have 250,000 illegal crossings or attempted illegal crossings a month. We've never seen numbers like this, and yet we keep getting told, "Oh, it's all cool. The border's under control." I don't know how you would define failure of securing our southern border if it's not what we're witnessing right now. But to no one's surprise in the Republican Party, there was zero funding in the majority's $3.5 trillion bill for border security. We face significant national security threats that have been made worse by this administration's own policies. There's no shame in admitting that, but we're responsible to deal with it. And that begins with honest communications, which we seem we're avoiding this right now with all due respect, my colleagues across the aisle, in a very disciplined manner, sticking to their talking points. Director Ray, I'm gonna ask you, yes or no, did did 19 terrorists execute the 9/11 jihadist terror attacks on America? Not the planning, the execution.
There were 19 hijackers.
Okay,
Yes.
there you go.
Okay,
So
there you go.
that's a number. That's a number I'm referring to. Now you won't tell us, although we're members of Congress, we have the very highest security clearance. We have confidential briefings all the time, but we can't get an answer how many known or suspected terrorists have been detected crossing our southern border. But my sources tell me it's a conservative estimate is 200. Now, with a percentage of undetected being 20 to 25%, that means 40 to 50 known terrorists have very likely entered our country through the southern border. And yet, my colleagues across the aisle want to talk about, Americans wearing Trump shirts. It's unbelievable. Secretary Mayorkas, good sir, all of us.
Gentleman's time from Louisiana has
I'll
expired.
have a question. I'll submit in writing to the secretary, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having the courage to convene this hearing today.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today and everything they're doing to keep the country safe. I'd like to start with you, Director Ray. Yesterday, you testified before the United States Senate about a Washington Post story that the FBI did not distribute a key to help victims of the Kaseya ransomware attack for 3 weeks. In your response, you emphasized the need to, quote, maximize impact against an adversary, end quote. So, I appreciate that as the lead agency for threat response, the FBI is responsible for going after the bad guys. However, I have to say I'm deeply concerned that your response to Chairman Peters did not reflect the harm withholding a decryption key could do to victims. I'd like you to just kind of consider this analogy, if you would, Director. A business is on fire. There's a strong reason to suspect arson. The police argue that letting the firefighters in to put out the fire risks damaging forensics that could be used to catch the arsonist. So certainly that argument is valid, but I don't think anyone here would suggest we should not put out the fire, or even if it does not maximize your impact against an adversary. So I understand these decisions are difficult and complex, and that you may not be at liberty to discuss the specifics of the Kaseya case. However, I'd like to give you the opportunity now to correct the record and affirm that asset response is a critically important factor when responding to a significant cyber incident.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the question, especially knowing your longstanding interest in this subject. Again, I'm somewhat constrained about what I can say about an ongoing investigation. But what I would say is that, speaking in general, that encryption keys are something that is just one of many kinds of technical information that we provide to the private sector. And turning those things into decryption tools that can actually be used and not have unintended consequences is actually a lot more complicated than a lot of people realize. And that itself takes time. So part of what I refer to when I talk about maximizing impact is making sure that, to use your analogy of the house, that what we would be supplying is actually just water, and not water that might have some trace of, say, gasoline or some accelerant in it that would actually have all kinds of unintended consequences. So that's one of many considerations that goes into it. But absolutely, we recognize that asset response has to go hand in hand with threat response. And that's why we have such a close partnership with DHS and CISA. And these kinds of decisions are made in consultation with a host of interagency partners.
Well, Director, I would just push back and say that I think that asset response has to be higher on the priority list. So much could have been prevented had those decryption keys been given to businesses that were impacted. I understand you can't comment specifically on Kaseya, but I think there's going to be a greater emphasis on asset response and not just preserving the crime scene so you gather forensics. Secretary Mayorkas, I want to commend you for your leadership and for the success of DHS on its cyber hiring initiatives. I do have to say, however, I remain concerned about the significant vacancies that remain in the cybersecurity workforce, particularly at CISA. So I'm hopeful about the cybersecurity talent management system set to start in November. However, given that these authorities have existed since 2014 and have not been used, I'm concerned about how effectively they will be used. So I'd appreciate an update on the status of the cybersecurity talent management system and how the DHS headquarters plans to coordinate its activity with CISA to amass the cyber talent that it needs.
Congressman, thank you so much for your support of CISA. I actually had a meeting yesterday on staffing and the prioritization of staffing for our cybersecurity portfolio specifically. I look forward to speaking with Director Easterly. I very well know that she has prioritized the staffing of the directorate and the talent initiative to which you refer. We're incredibly proud of our cybersecurity hiring initiative, which is frankly the biggest in the department's history. This is assuredly a priority of ours, and I'd be very, very pleased to update you on it regularly because I know how important it is to you in light of your tremendous support of CISA and the criticality of our nation's cybersecurity writ large.
Thank you. I know my time is
Ted-
time, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi for 5 minutes, Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for the dedication that they have provided in service to our country, particularly to make sure that they are keeping our homeland safe each and every day. Before I begin, I would like to ask the clerk if she would please pull the chart from Customs Border Patrol that outlines the encounters on the southwest border that we have currently seen. My concerns today are many. My time is limited, so I will focus those on the current situation that we have seen along our southwest border. In front of each of our witnesses should be statistics put forth by Customs Border Patrol that shows recent encounters along the southwest border. Secretary Mayorkas, I know that you have recently visited the southwest border in response to the surge that we've seen and the number of Haitian immigrants that have recently crossed. I know Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee recently said in her questioning a few minutes ago that she felt that the border is not out of control. And I will tell you that I completely disagree with her statement. I think the figures that are before the witnesses here today clearly show that the situation along our southwest border is a situation that has continued to deteriorate month after month after month. Taking out from those figures the month of October, November, December, and January, just starting from the numbers February going forward, when this administration has been completely in control of Customs Border Patrol, those numbers are 1.25 million encounters along the southwest border. Looking at that and comparing that to the population of our states, that number is greater than the population of Montana, greater than the population of Rhode Island, greater than the population of Delaware, greater than the population of both North and South Dakota, greater than the population of Alaska, though not a state, greater than the population of the District of Columbia. It is greater than the population of Vermont. It is greater than the population of Wyoming. And soon, when figures become available for this month, I believe that we will quickly surpass the population of Maine, New Hampshire, and Hawaii. I think clearly these figures show that what we are doing along our southwest border, what the current administration has done, that is not working. And not only do I believe that, but I believe that is clearly the sentiment of the American public. Politico, an article that was actually published yesterday, they cited recent polling that said 38% of the United States adults approve of President Biden's handling of immigration. And so Secretary Mayorkas wanted to kind of now turn that to you. And it was reported in August that you met with a group of Border Patrol agents, and in a closed door meeting, you stated, if our borders are the first line of defense, we're going to lose, and this is unsustainable. My question is, one, did you make that statement? And then two, do you still stand by that statement? And do you believe that what currently is happening on our borders today is unsustainable?
Congressman, thank you very much for your question. In fact, I did make the statement, and a very important fact underlying it is that our border is not our first line of defense. We have a multi-layered strategy that includes our partners to the south, not only Mexico, but the countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So in fact, our border is not our first line of defense. It is a statement that I made, and I stand by it. And in fact, it does not reflect the strategy that we have been employing and executing.
And Mr. Mayorkas, you see those figures there in front of you, I believe. Hopefully those are visible to you. And I think that you see that month after month, we continue to see a rise. We saw a recent small dip from July to August. But those figures are extremely troubling, particularly when you look at year-to-date figures. When you compare the numbers from FY21 to FY20, comparing them to FY 2019, FY 2018. You know, when you're looking at a total of, when you look at a physical year, it's 1.5 million. Again, giving the administration the benefit of the doubt, the fact that October, November, December, and just credit all of January to the prior administration, the numbers month after month continue to grow. And so I guess my question to you, Mr. Mayorkas, is how would you rate the administration? How would you rate the job that has been done to secure our border since the president was sworn into office? Would that be A, B, C, D, F? Just if you could give me a grade, and then I'd be happy to let you explain your answer from there.
Congressman, it's interesting you mentioned what you describe as a small dip in the latest month's data. I cannot see the visuals that you presented. That dip is actually a decrease, and it is a decrease because of some of the enforcement tools that we have employed in execution of our plan. I have been quite clear that we do have a plan to address migration at the southern border. We're executing it. It takes time, and we're starting to see the results. I'd be very pleased to meet with you and discuss with you some of the tools that we have employed to actually drive the results that we saw this past month and we expect to see in the ongoing months. Those tools are not met with unanimous approval, but we are using those enforcement tools to help secure our border, which we are doing.
Could you answer the question as giving a grade as A, B, C, D, or F? Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to enter the chart that was previously published into the record.
Without objection. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes, Mr. Correa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I want to thank you and the ranking member for this hearing this morning. I want to thank our guests also for your time. And I was also in New York to remember 9/11. We met with our first responders, our heroes. And I remember back 20 years ago, watching those images on TV as those first responders ran into the burning buildings, knowing they were probably going to lose their lives while civilians ran away. We will not forget. Gentlemen, your witnesses, your testimony, thank you very much. And as I hear my colleagues on this committee talk, it kind of brings out a universal truth that I've learned in Congress, which is we're always in management crisis. We manage by crisis. we never seem to move beyond yesterday or today to the big issue. I agree with my colleagues that fentanyl is a major issue. But I would propose to all of you that if you seal off the southern border, you seal off the northern border, you seal off the ports of entry, we're still going to have that major issue, which is a medical issue called drug addiction in our country. As long as people want to do fentanyl, they're going to do it. 40 years ago, I saw my neighbors dying from heroin overdoses. Challenge that we have that's not going away. And Mr. Mayorkas, I would ask you, are you prepared to deal with the social issue of drug addiction in our country? Yes or no?
Yes, I am, in collaboration with our partners across the federal enterprise and across the
You
country.
can deal with a medical issue called drug addiction in the United States. That's not really a Homeland Security issue. That's a societal issue. But we're going to expect you to stop drug addiction at the border. Thank you very much. And Mr. Ray, thank you very much for the good job you're doing. You know, defending our country like you, Mr. Mayorkas, you all have to hit 100%. You can't let anything happen in this nation. Yet the universe of threats keeps multiplying. Terrorists, domestic terrorism. I hear experts now telling me that it's no longer is essential for the bad guys to import the bad guys, to import terrorists, but rather the homegrown terrorists that keep being inspired by these radical ideas are the big issue now. So, you know, trying to figure out how to protect our nation against domestic terrorists, it's a major challenge. And I think the big issue here becomes intelligence. How do you figure out, how do you stop something from happening before it stops? And my question would be, do you gentlemen get enough support, coordination from our foreign partners? Mr. Mayorkas, when you talk to Mexico, are you able to get enough intelligence, coordination, cooperation from them to do your job? And I would ask the same question our FBI director. Do we have enough intel internationally to be able to coordinate your intelligence services? You're trying to find a needle in the haystack. Mr. Mayorkas.
Information sharing, Congressman, is one of our highest priorities in the international domain. We have a very significant footprint in many countries around the world. We have information sharing agreements that a number of our component agencies and offices lead. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Protection, our Office of Policy, Strategy, and Plans, our international operations, which is a part of that last office I mentioned.
Mr. Mayorkas, is there anything we can do to make sure that your job is more effective? Meaning, is there anything we can do to talk to address our foreign partners to make sure that you have a better level of cooperation with folks overseas?
Congressman, thank you very much for the question. We would greatly appreciate and have greatly appreciated the support that this committee has provided to us in funding the Department of Homeland Security's requests for support to execute our mission. We're greatly appreciative.
FBI Director Ray.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Certainly, we benefit a lot from information sharing from our foreign partners. You mentioned Mexico. Of course, our LEGAT office in Mexico City is, I think, our biggest and oldest overseas office. We can always use more. And certainly, with the kind of terrorist threats we're facing right now, both homegrown jihadist-inspired and domestic violent extremists each benefit, unfortunately, from there being fewer dots to connect. So if there are fewer dots to connect and less time in which to connect them, it puts a real premium on making sure that we're able to find the few dots that are out there as quickly as possible. And that's why we appreciate this committee's support for more agents, more analysts, more data analytics, and other tools, which we desperately need to stay ahead of the threat.
Gentlemen's time from California has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida for 5 minutes, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to read some excerpt from Chief Scott's letter that's dated 9/11/2021. The Biden administration's team at DHS is laser focused on expediting the flow of migrants into the U.S. and downplaying the significant vulnerability this creates for terrorists, narcotic smugglers, human traffickers, and even hostile nations to gain access to our homeland. Later on, he says the experienced civil service staff within CBP, ICE, and DHS have provided multiple options to reduce the illegal entries and reestablish some semblance of border security through proven programs and consequences. Yet every recommendation has been similarly rejected. Secretary Mayorkas is choosing to ignore the sound recommendations of career government leadership, despite his own admissions that he agrees with them. Of grave concern is the fact that the Secretary and other political appointees within DHS have provided factually inaccurate or incorrect information to congressional representatives and to the American public. Furthermore, they have directed U.S. BP personnel to allow otherwise ineligible aliens to remain in the U.S. consistent with CDC Title 42 order, established legal processes, and law. The professional staff within DHS is left perplexed, wondering who is really in charge and what the objective is. This is a scathing indictment on you, Secretary, and the administration's handling of the border. And so I have a couple of questions. Secretary Mayorkas, how many immigrants have we apprehended at the border this year?
So, Congressman, I respectfully disagree with Mr. Scott, of course. And let me pull, if I can, the data from August, which I think will shed
That's
light.
not the question, sir. That's not the question. The question is how many immigrants have we apprehended this year? Not August, this year.
I believe thus far this fiscal year, Congressman, it is approximately 1.2 or 1.5 million, but I think the data that I would cite from August reflects the enforcement measures that we are taking, our use of our Title 42 authority, which is not an immigration enforcement authority, but is a public health authority, which belies some of the statements that you just made, and also our use of Title 8 authority, which is indeed an immigration enforcement measure. I think the data from August would suggest the fulsomeness of our enforcement measures, which are not, as I mentioned
Sir, with
earlier.
all due respect, I've only got 5 minutes. I got a couple other questions I need to ask you, and I'm not really all worried about August. I understand that August, you all now have put a focus on it because you've found out the American public really doesn't like what you're doing. So let me keep going. Let me ask you,
That is not accurate. That is not
of the
accurate.
1.5 million people that we've apprehended, how many people have been returned? How many people are being detained? And how many people have been dispersed?
I would be pleased to provide you with specific data subsequent to this hearing, Congressman. And your prior statement was inaccurate, but I would look forward and in fact meeting
Sir,
with
that's
you
my
in
opinion.
person.
Sir, that's my opinion, okay? And so I'm entitled to my opinion, okay?
No,
And so,
I respect that, Congressman, and I'd be very pleased to provide you with the specific data you've requested.
well, sir, yesterday you were asked exactly the same question and you gave exactly the same answer. You'd think you'd be a little bit better prepared now that you've been asked that question, that now maybe somebody else is going to ask you the same question. You don't have that information?
Oh, Congressman, let me share something with you quite clearly. I work 18 hours a day. Okay, so when I returned from yesterday's hearing, I actually focused on mission. We will get that data both to the senator who posed it yesterday and to you, Congressman, today.
So you don't have any estimation at all at the numbers that I'm asking for at all? You don't know how many have been returned? You don't know how many have been released into the United States? You don't have any estimation at all of what those numbers are?
Congressman, I want to be precise in my communication of data to the United States Congress and to you specifically, having posed the question. And I will be
Thank you very much.
precise in the provision of my data to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes young lady from Michigan for 5 minutes, Ms. Slotkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thanks for our witnesses for being here. You know, I think a lot of us are struggling to understand with the withdrawal in Afghanistan, sort of what era are we in? You know, now that we've had the 20th anniversary of 9/11, How are we to think differently about the threats facing the country? And we, of course, have foreign terrorist organizations. We have homegrown folks who are inspired by groups abroad. We have our problem with domestic terrorism and domestic extremism. We have border issues. We have cyber issues. So I think at least my constituents are just trying to understand, like, where are we and what are sort of the biggest threats that we're facing. And Director Ray, you've also always been a really straight shooter about numbers, right? About just being clear about data and cases, since that's the bread and butter of the FBI. And so if you could just help me understand order of magnitude when it comes to open investigations that you have of foreign terrorist organizations, people connected to an actual foreign terrorist group, versus a homegrown guy or gal who's inspired by someone abroad, versus a domestic terrorist or domestic violent extremist. Can you just tell me order of magnitude, where do you have the most open cases?
So thank you, Congresswoman. On domestic violent extremists, we currently have, as I said in my opening statement, now up to about 2,700 open investigations, which is up from about, say, 1,400 last year, which was itself up significantly from where it was when I started in this job. On homegrown violent extremists, which is a reference to, as you know, jihadist inspired or foreign terrorist organization inspired, but not necessarily directed terrorism, we have consistently hovered at around 1,000. I think we're a little under that right now, but sometimes it's been more than 1,000, sometimes it's been less than 1,000, but it's hovered kind of up and down around that range. As far as the third category, true foreign terrorist organization cases, I don't have that number at my fingertips. The last time I looked, I think that is probably around 2,000 maybe. So between the foreign terrorist organization cases and the homegrown violent extremist cases, I think that gets you to give or take around 3,000 investigations total.
Gotcha.
Plus the 2,700 domestic violent extremists.
Right. Okay. So it just helps to give a sense of what your level of effort is being focused on, and how to understand this era. Representative Abizaid, I'm sorry, Director Abizaid, there are few people in the world that I trust more than you on Afghanistan. You're an expert on the country. You've spent a lot of time there. You were a Deputy Assistant Secretary on Afghanistan. And I think what I'm getting from my constituents is this question of, are we safer now than we were on 9/11? Are the ability of these terrorist groups to reconstitute something that I should worry about at the same level of worry that I had on September 12th? So help me understand where we are. Are we safer now? Are we the same level of safety with all the investment we've made in 20 years? Where are we?
Thank you very much for the question. As I mentioned yesterday, years of CT pressure in Afghanistan and Pakistan had really relegated both Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K to more regional threats. As I testified today, you look at how the threat has changed over time since 9/11, and the Al-Qaeda network operates in a very different way than it did on that fateful day. And you have a broader array of terrorist groups that are operating across a broader swath of territory, not just Afghanistan and Pakistan, but Africa, Middle East, other parts of South Asia. In general, this kind of broader diffuse terrorist network, exemplified by the Al-Qaeda network and the expanding ISIS network, does appear more regionally focused. That said, that regional focus is something that we in the intelligence community are monitoring very closely to understand at what point it presents a threat to the homeland. When does that regional ambition turn back into a transnational ambition that they're actually pursuing and executing a plan against? With respect to reconstitution in Afghanistan in particular, this is exactly what we're focused on as a top priority today, which is how do we understand how the changed circumstances in Afghanistan will affect the trajectory of two groups that had sustained significant losses over the last couple of years. In the case of Al-Qaeda, over the last 20 years. And what does that mean for their plans and intentions going forward? My own concern is very specifically around ISIS-K and the degree to which ISIS-K, building off of the notoriety it received after the attack on August 26th, will it become more focused on the West, more focused on the homeland than it was previously? And as we look at the kind of dynamism of what's happening in the region, that's what our analysts are going to be focused on going forward.
Young lady's time from Michigan has expired. Chair recognizes young lady from Tennessee for 5 minutes, Ms. Harshbarger.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. And I have a couple of questions, just yes or no questions for Secretary Mayorkas. Sir, we know what happened in Afghanistan with the Taliban being in control, with the assumption that Al-Qaeda can now operate as they did leading up to 9/11. These are some yes and no questions. Do you know how many terrorists have been apprehended at our southern border, sir?
I do know how known or suspected terrorists, how many, and I'd be pleased to provide that
Yes,
to you in a classified context.
That would be awesome. Honestly, do you think there's a ripe opportunity for more terrorists, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, whomever, to come across the southern border since it's wide open? That's a yes or no.
No.
All right. Is a Remain in Mexico policy being implemented and enforced?
It is being implemented. We are developing the implementation plan as we are required to by court order. And I would like to mention, Congresswoman, that requires a bilateral agreement. The Remain in Mexico program.
We just need to know yes or no, since the Supreme Court, sir, said that it needed to be implemented. So if you could give us proof of that. Do you think if we continued to build a wall that would stop over 208,000 people coming across the border illegally, sir? Yes or no?
I do not agree with the continuation of the construction of the wall.
Okay, since you don't want to build the wall, are we still paying the contractors not to build the wall, sir?
Congresswoman, we are meeting our contractual obligations as we are required.
That's yes. Okay, thank you, sir. Director Ray, can you give us as a committee an update on the people that have been arrested from the January 6th?
I'm not sure the Secretary understood you. You going in and out. Try it again.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Can you give us an update on the people who have been held from January 6th?
Well, what I can tell you is that we have now made a little over 600 arrests. The status of each of those cases varies. We've had some cases that have been resolved by guilty pleas already, but a number of them are still pending, and that's probably all I could really contribute in this kind of setting.
So has every one of them been charged, sir?
Well, the 600, give or take, are all people who have been charged. Obviously, we have other ongoing investigations, and there may be more charges there. And then the ones who have been charged, I think you could expect to see, in some instances, superseding indictments that would add additional charges.
Can you, in a classified briefing, tell us where they're being held?
I'm not sure whether that's a classified issue. I think it varies from person to person, and I'd have to see what information was appropriate. But if there's information we can provide, we're happy to share it with you. I am mindful of the fact that with those 600 cases, that is quite a number of federal judges who have very strong opinions about what we say about pending criminal cases. And I learned a long time ago, as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney, to respect the views of the judges who are responsible for those cases.
Okay. Do you agree that China's one of the biggest threats to our national security, sir?
I believe that the that China, and by that I mean the People's Republic of China government, the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people, is that there's no country that represents a more significant counterintelligence threat or a more significant threat to our innovation, our economic security, and our ideas. And that's why, as you heard me say in my opening statement, we're opening a new China counterintelligence investigation about every 12 hours. And I can assure this committee that's not because our agents are looking around for something to do. It's because there's a need. And that's why we have about 2,000 plus open investigations of that sort leading back to different parts of the Chinese government or people acting on behalf of the Chinese government, even as we speak.
I believe that too. And I agree with Representative Correa. These illegal drugs, the fentanyl, the meth that's coming across the border, we need to hold these cartels accountable. And are we doing that? And, you know, all HSI told us when we went to the border, to the Rio Grande Valley, is let us do our job. Are we letting them do their job?
Certainly are, Congresswoman. We most certainly are, Congresswoman. And we are developing new strategies all the time to meet the threat of the TCOs, the transnational criminal organizations.
Okay. I do believe that's the biggest criminal threat to our country. Thank you, sir, and I yield back.
I recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all the witnesses. Director Ray, I want to again, I said this the last time you were here. You just expressed appreciation for how you play your job straight. Let me go a little bit further and say that I am, very much concerned about people crossing our borders, but I'm more concerned about the fact that we are a nation that is simply cross. And it is very disturbing. And I can speak experientially here. There was one gentleman who firebombed my office in Kansas City. His name is Eric King. He is in the Colorado Supermax prison. And then there's a gentleman who was just indicted for his little plan to kill me. His name is Kenneth Hubert. And then you spoke earlier about a guy, Timothy Wilson, who was shot and killed by law enforcement because he had a plan in our community to blow up a hospital with a vehicle-borne explosive. I am very, very much. I mentioned all of this to the chairman last night, Chairman Thompson last night. I am very concerned about where our nation is and what we are doing in our nation, and frankly, some of it is coming up here in our hearing today. But Director Ray, is there something that we can do as members of Congress? I'm not asking you to say anything political, but if there are things that we can do to arrest or reduce the domestic terrorism threat, I'm all in. And if you or any of our any of our witnesses today can suggest something that this body can do, I'm ready to try to do it before lunch. Director Ray.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the question and for your kind words of support. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier, we need more agents, more analysts, more tools for data analytics and so forth, because the volume of threats, as your own experience illustrates, is significant. I would also say that more and more across every threat area we contend with, including in the terrorism arena in particular, the issues of end-to-end encryption and user-controlled encryption, both on messaging and on devices, is something that is making us in law enforcement increasingly blind to the threats in our ability to protect all of you and your constituents. And that's a real problem, and it needs to be addressed. I think a lot of Americans don't understand that we are moving rapidly in a direction where no matter how ironclad your support for a search warrant is, no matter how much the judge vigorously enforces its order, and no matter how heartbreaking or horrifying the criminal activity we're investigating, we're moving in a direction where no matter what that is, we will not be able to see the information, and therefore will be significantly hobbled in our ability to protect Americans. And so that's an issue coming to a place where we have lawful access to encrypted information is got to be addressed somehow, or we're going to all wake up in a much more dangerous spot than we already are. So that would be one thing. And then the last point, of course, is the more everyone, including prominent members of the public, our politicians, our corporate officials, et cetera, can.
I think my time must be running out. I apologize, Mr. Chairman, if I went over.
You actually have a little time, but I'll take it if you want to give it up. I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, the ranking member, for hosting this hearing today. Director Wray, my first question is for you. Last week, FBI Deputy Director Paul Abadi said there has been no indication that the Russian government, through President Putin, have taken steps to stop the activities of cyber criminals engaging in ransomware attacks against U.S. entities. In fact, just yesterday, there was an attack on the new cooperative, an Iowa-based farm service provider who was hit with a ransomware attack and we think a Russian-linked criminal group, Black Matter, is demanding $5.9 million ransom. This is the exact attack that President Biden had messaged to President Putin against, that this is a critical infrastructure, it's a sector, and this is off limits. So I understand from your testimony that FBI is working with State Department and the National Security Council to increase pressure on countries that failed to stop ransomware actors in their territory, like Russia. What specific steps is the FBI taking to pressure these groups? What more should the administration be doing to hold these foreign adversarial linked criminal groups accountable?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the question. Certainly, it's a topic that is the subject of quite a bit of discussion and planning and operational activity these days. There may be more that we could share in a more classified setting, but what I would tell you in this setting is that the reality is that Russia has a long history of being a safe haven for cyber criminals, where the implicit understanding has been that if they avoid going after Russian targets or victims, they can operate with near impunity. And the Russian government has long refused to extradite Russians for cyber crimes against American victims. And worse, their Ministry of Foreign Affairs has long been warning its citizens, publicly been warning its citizens, which other countries, which third-party countries to avoid, because those countries, they say, will arrest or extradite those Russians back to the United States to face justice for cybercrime. So it's too soon to tell whether any of the things that are underway are having an impact, but in my experience, there is a lot of room for them to show some meaningful progress if they want to on this topic.
So are you saying you can't talk about the specific pressure that you're putting on Russia because it's classified? Is that why we can't talk about it right now?
Well, I think I can provide you potentially a more descriptive answer if I don't have the concerns about what I can say publicly. That's all.
I understand. I would hope that we would to do that, because this is a huge issue that does not seem to be stopping. It's just getting worse every month. We hear about another, maybe every week now, we hear about another ransomware attack from a Russian-backed, or if not Russian-backed, they're operating freely in Russia. These groups. So I would very much appreciate if we could have that meeting, Mr. Ray. Mr. Secretary, I have a question following up on, actually, I don't know if it was brought up already, but it's dealing with cyber, and which is, I think, a huge threat to our national security. I understand that there are reports have indicated that the Secret Service purchased 8 drones from a Chinese company called DJI on July 26, 2021. And just 3 days earlier, on July 23rd, the Department of Defense released a statement saying that DJI's products pose the threats to national security. Plus, in 2017, DHS itself stated with moderate confidence that DJI was providing U.S. critical infrastructure and law enforcement data to the Chinese government. The fact that the Secret Service purchased 8 drones, this seems absolutely unacceptable. Why would they purchase equipment from a known foreign adversary, especially in the light of well-documented cybersecurity vulnerabilities? How can the American people trust DHS to protect us from cyber crimes and attacks, ransomware attacks, when the federal government is leaving itself open to security risk by buying buying equipment from companies like DJI?
Congressman, my answer is twofold. Number one, cybersecurity is one of our top priorities in the Department of Homeland Security, and we have an extraordinarily talented and dedicated workforce on that critical mission set. And I will look into the Secret Service purchase that you reference, and I will get back to you and your staff as soon as possible.
I appreciate that, because this is, I hope it's very soon, because I don't think we should be using these equipment if our DHS and the Department of Defense have already said that DJI and their equipment cannot be trusted. So I hope we look into this right away before the drones are actually delivered. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses for appearing. And I must say that I have great respect for both of the witnesses. Having observed them over some time now, I have found them to be persons who seem to genuinely want to do the right thing. Me, doing the right thing is important. Almost as important as doing the righteous thing. So today, I would like to have a friendly, more of a colloquy than a Q&A. And I'm just curious about something, because we know that Title 42 allows persons to be quickly removed, literally without giving them an opportunity to seek asylum. I suppose you can make your efforts, but Title 42 is for quick removal, as I understand it. And then we also know that TPS allows persons to stay because of conditions in the country that they would ordinarily be returned to. Haitians are in a very unique position. Title 42 allows them to be removed. TPS, for those who are already here, says that because of the conditions in Haiti, we shouldn't send them back there. So if we shouldn't send them back because of conditions, and we find that we have persons who should be removed under Title 42, I'm asking, is there some way to reconcile this so that we don't give the appearance of contradicting ourselves, so that we show that there's some rationale for Haitians remaining here? Now, we had testimony just yesterday, I believe, indicating that when the Haitians are expelled, they're sent back, they get a phone, some amount of money. Many of them, over 95% according to the testimony, haven't been to Haiti in years. So we're sending people back to a country that they haven't been to in years, and there are others who are going to be allowed to stay because they happen to have been in the country at a certain time. And we're doing this under Title 42. TPS allows for stay. So isn't there some way, I'm just making an appeal for the Haitians, that there's some way for us to re-examine this? This is an appeal, Mr. Secretary, for us to re-examine this. Maybe there's something we missed. And can you give me some hope, please?
Congressman, I very much appreciate what you've said, the question you've posed, and the spirit of your question. I don't think that we can overstate the heartbreak with respect to the vulnerability of the Haitian people whom we are encountering, specifically in Del Rio, Texas, over the last week, and their vulnerability. There are a number of things I'd like to say. Number one, we did grant temporary protected status to Haitian nationals who were resident in the United States prior to July 29th of this year. We, in collaboration with the Department of State, studied the country conditions there and made that determination. And then we have looked at the country conditions and made a determination that in fact we can return individuals who've arrived subsequent to July 29th to Haiti. We are working with countries in South America, Chile, Brazil, for example, to see whether they would accept the return of Haitians who've traveled from those countries. It's complicated for reasons I can explain at a later time when we have more time. And the Title 42 authority, as I've mentioned earlier, is not a matter of immigration policy. It is a matter of public health policy as determined by the Centers for Disease Control's assessment of, in this case specifically, over last year and this year, the trajectory of the COVID-19 pandemic, and most recently, of course, the Delta variant.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I do appreciate what you said. What would you need for us to reconcile this such that the Haitians would be able to would get a different result? Because I'm just so concerned about having made a decision that the country is not such that we can send some back, but if you got here at a later time, the two conditions have changed. Now, I've been to Haiti. I was there after the last earthquake, not the most recent one, but the one before that. And Haiti, on a good day, can be a place that can be difficult to negotiate. And I'm trying to be very kind because I've got a lot of constituents from Haiti. They love their country. I love it too. So my question is that there just seems to me that there must be something that we can do. And if it requires something from Congress, I'm willing to be the guy to take the risk and ask that we do it. Can you give me some help on this, please?
Thank you, Congressman. I'd welcome the chance to discuss that further with you. I know that the State Department, PRM, one office within the State Department, as well as USAID, is very focused on resourcing Haiti and specifically providing greater sustenance to the individuals who are returned there. This is a very complicated and very heartbreaking situation. I really embrace the spirit with which you pose the questions to me, and I would welcome the opportunity to sit down with you and talk it through.
Thank you. How do I contact you? Will you contact me?
We will reach out, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Haitians that I represent.
Gentleman's time has
Thank you, Mr.
expired.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, for 5 minutes.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, when Jay Johnson was secretary, you were deputy, and I was chairman of Homeland. We had the rise of ISIS and the caliphate. And I commend your department and the FBI and NCTC for stopping probably 99% of those threats. And I worry with the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban and Bagram Air Base being taken over, we have no eyes and ears on the ground. We have no ISR capability. We can't see or hear anymore the threats, and we can't see Russia, China, and Iran as well as we could before the fall of Bagram. But I want to go back to the border, as Mr. Green was talking about, because in my state of Texas, all these Haitians, 14,000 of them, in addition to the over 1 million that have come in this year, has caused a crisis. I think in your words, you said it's unsustainable and told Border Patrol agents that we are going to lose. And I agree with you with that. I've also obtained emails from CBP agents stationed in Del Rio warning and asking for more resources in early June. And then the foreign minister of Panama warned on June the 3rd about this influx that was coming up to the southwest border. Did you see this threat coming? And if so, what, if anything, did you do?
So if I may, Congressman, thank you. It's good to see you. Again, I know we've worked closely for a number of years. I did not say that we are going to lose. That's unequivocally false, number one. And number two, we have not seen before such a rapid migration, irregular migration of individuals as we have observed and experienced with respect to the Haitians who've crossed the border in Del Rio, Texas. That has been an unprecedented speed.
But did you have any warning signs? When the sector chief is being warned about this, when the Panama foreign minister is warning on June the 3rd, and here we are in September, months later. Did you see this coming?
Well, so we watched the flow of individuals who are seeking to migrate irregularly through Mexico from the Northern Triangle countries and further south. We do indeed track it. Nevertheless, Congressman, as I previously articulated, the speed with which this materialized is unprecedented. And that is why we surged as many resources as we have. We have deployed as many.
If I could just one last question, and that is, you said this is the worst in 21 years, and I agree with you. And the speed has been very fast paced. The migrant protection protocols, the asylum agreements negotiated by the prior administration, I believe were effective. And unfortunately, this president on day one rescinded those agreements, opening up this border. And the traffickers know that. They know that if they touch base in the United States, they can stay now. And I respect you, sir. I think you've been a federal prosecutor, deputy secretary. Now you understand this concept of deterrence, but also the fact that these were working. My question is, this has now been taken up to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they have upheld the decision that the migrant protection protocols need to be reinstated. I believe that you can call it whatever you want, sir, but it will greatly help in securing this border that is out of control right now. What are you doing to comply with the Supreme Court order?
Congressman, as you know, both of us served as federal prosecutors. We have an obligation to abide by the orders of a court. The district court ordered us to implement the MPP program, and that is indeed what we are doing. We are in ongoing negotiations with Mexico with respect to that implementation. We rely upon Mexico's agreement to do so, and we are moving with deliberate speed. I recognize and respect and will abide by a court order.
I appreciate that. I think it will help tremendously. Any assistance you need with dealing with Mexico, I've chaired the U.S.-Mexico IPG for 15 years, and I hope they'll be willing to take the agreement back or to reinstate it, because I do think it will make a difference in this crisis that we have at our border.
Gentleman's time from Texas has expired. Here I recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes, Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you, Chairman. My first question is directed to Director Wray, and I have been tracking the public reports of anomalous health attacks worldwide, including public reporting that there may have been attacks domestically in the United States. And so, Director, what are you doing at the FBI with your agents to determine who is responsible for these attacks, and what message do you have to those conducting these attacks as to what you will do if you find out who they are?
For the question, thank you, Congressman. Certainly there is nothing more important to us than the health and safety of our own workforce and the intelligence community's workforce. We at the FBI are working very aggressively in a very concerted way together with our intelligence community partners, who also have a huge role to play on this issue. Our role is doing interviews of victims and pursuing the investigation from both a potential criminal but also national security type perspective. But again, it's a victim-focused effort at the moment. And we are going to make sure that if we can figure out who is responsible, that we leave no stone unturned in holding them very firmly unaccountable. Because if this is an attack, it's totally, totally unacceptable.
Thank you, Director. And thank you, Director. And moving to ransomware attacks, also something that has affected America's businesses. And John Chambers, former CEO at Cisco, predicts that there will be 60,000 ransomware attacks. The Bureau has worked to try and help America's businesses, but what additional resources do you need to, one, reach out and work with businesses who have been affected, reach out, provide perhaps cyber hygiene tools that they may need, and of course, to try and claw back any keys that have been stolen from them. And I would also welcome Secretary Mayorkas if he had any insights on this.
Well, thank you for the question. Certainly, ransomware has mushroomed significantly over the last year, and it's on pace to mushroom again this year. In terms of what we need, we have significant budget requests that have come before the Congress that are pending as part of a 5-year cyber strategy that I unveiled last September, a year ago. And part of that is designed to make sure that in every field office, we have a true model cyber squad capable of handling a Colonial Pipeline, a JBS, a Kaseya, whatever it happens to be in every field office. We also have the need to be able to improve our training, and we need more technical tools. And I would also say, I know there have been various legislative proposals swirling around about potential pay grade modifications for computer-trained cyber expert personnel in a number of agencies. And if something like that were to go into effect, obviously we would want it to apply to the FBI as well. And a lot of what those personnel are going to do is not just investigate, respond, and disrupt threats, but engage, to your point, with the private sector, with victims. That's one of the strengths, one of the things that the FBI can provide to the fight is with 56 field offices and 250 something RAs, we can put agents on the doorstep of a victim often within an hour or two, no matter where they are and when they get hit. And that's why we need the footprint to be able to make sure that we're doing right by all the victims.
Thank you, Director. And Director Mayorkas, actually, I'll follow up with you separately on ransomware, but I do have a question about the reimbursable services program for airports. All politics is local, and I have a local airport in Livermore, California, that would like to use this service, pay for it itself, so that as international flights come in, they can have border agents or CBP custom agents to receive the flights. Is that still a program that DHS supports if local airports want to do that?
It is, and it is a Congressman, thank you. It is a program that is implemented on a fact-specific, circumstance-specific basis, and we look forward to speaking with you about it and the jurisdiction that you identified.
Great, thank you. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5
Thank
minutes.
you, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Sluga.
Secretary Mayorkas, good to see you. We have a letter that I know has been referenced from outgoing Border Patrol Chief Rodney Scott that basically claimed of great concern that he's witnessed any lack of meaningful effort to secure the southern border. And I'd like to ask you, this person was 29 years in the department, a nonpartisan actor, somebody that served 5 administrations with the only goal of securing this country. Is the border more secure under your leadership than when you started?
Congressman, the border is secure. We're executing our plan, and I've been very clear and unequivocal in that regard.
Mr. Secretary, the question is the border more secure now under your leadership?
Congressman, it is no less secure than it was previously.
Mr. Secretary, I want to look at something in his letter. Outgoing Border Patrol Chief Rodney Scott said that suspected terrorists are entering this country at a level we have never seen before. And I want to know, I know it's been asked, how many known or suspected terrorists have entered this country this year?
I respectfully disagree with Mr. Scott's assertion and the information that you have requested. We'd be pleased to share with you in a classified context.
He said, in my professional assessment, the U.S. Border Patrol is rapidly losing situational awareness required to know who and what is entering our homeland. The ability of U.S. Border Patrol to detect and interdict those that want to evade apprehension is being degraded daily. Low-level, unsophisticated, and uneducated smugglers are illegally crossing the border and increasingly evading apprehension daily. To think that well-resourced terrorist networks, criminal organizations, and hostile nations are not doing the same is naive. The current situation is unsustainable and must be mitigated. So I've received the brief. I went to Del Rio in less than 1 week. I was actually there on Saturday at the peak, 15,000 people in what your department said yesterday, bum rushed the border. That was, and there's, by the way, 40 to 60,000 on the way. So is the quote true at a level we have never seen before, that terrorists, suspected terrorists, are entering this country at a level that we have never seen before?
Congressman, as I've previously articulated, I respectfully disagree with Mr. Scott's assertions. And I should say that assertion has no relationship to a reference to Del Rio and the fact that vulnerable Haitians have crossed the border there, have been encountered, and are being repatriated. Those are two very different.
It ties in because I talked to these Haitians. They got the word that Del Rio was open. They came. And in fact, I talked to two Cuban couples, 4 people total, from Cuba to Panama to the southern border in Del Rio, 40 hours. It took them 40 hours to get to our southern border because what they heard through social media, what they heard through their networks was that it was open. They paid thousands of dollars to trafficking organizations to get there. So to think, like Rodney Scott says, outgoing Border Patrol chief for 29 years, 5 administrations, to think that well-resourced terrorist networks, criminal organizations, and hostile nations are not doing the same is naive. Mr. Secretary, why the American public deserves to know what the threat is to our country? Why will we not release numbers? Why are you not releasing the number of known or suspected terrorists that have entered this country?
Congressman, I've been very clear that I'd be very pleased to share that information with you in a classified context. Number one, I don't think that the vulnerable Haitians who are in Del Rio, Texas now would say that the border in Del Rio, Texas is open. And quite frankly, we've seen the heartbreaking pictures.
It's heartbreaking. I was there. I saw it.
Congressman, that reflect that fact.
And in fact, there's all sorts of bad things going on, but it's a drain on resources. We'd had to repurpose Border Patrol agents from their national security mission all along the southern border to Del Rio. The governor of Texas has had to step in because the federal government has abdicated the duty to protect our country. So
I respectfully disagree. We have never abdicated our duty to protect our country. As a matter of fact, the 250,000 men and women of this department work day and night.
And they are doing a phenomenal job, Mr. Secretary. We are calling it, as Texans and as Americans, we want to know how many known or suspected terrorists have entered this country. And I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes young lady from Nevada, Ms. Titus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to start by thanking you too for your work to extend the TPS provisions for several countries. This was something I asked you about the last time you were here, looked at El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. This is a large part of my district, which is the most diverse in Nevada and one of the most diverse in the country. So we certainly appreciate you're recognizing the importance of that TPS, and thank you for that extension. Well, you've heard a lot about the concern about the Haitians at the border, and I'd like to expand on that, but I'd like to go back to where they came from. We know that the cartels and some of these people who prey on the immigrants have taken their money, they've sold their possessions, they've come up here. Could you describe how your department in this kind of all of government approach is working with the State Department and maybe with NGOs in some of the countries of origin to counter this false information or to deal with these people who are preying on folks who just want a better life?
Congresswoman, thank you so much. And your point goes directly to something the congressman who preceded your question addressed, which is these individuals, vulnerable individuals, are being exploited by smuggling organizations and are receiving false information with respect to the border. We are in collaboration with the Department of State and other agencies within the government, countering that false information, that false messaging, both from the United States and in the countries of origin themselves. You know, this past Sunday, I spoke to journalists, Haitian journalists, and the messages that I communicated were blasted throughout social media and in Creole, as well as Spanish, to make sure that we reach the desired and needed populations. This is an all-of-government effort, and it's a multilateral effort because we are working with other countries in ensuring that vulnerable populations receive accurate information and do not take the perilous journey north that will not succeed.
Well, I know that we can take advantage of social media. Everybody, even those in the most direst of straits, seems to have a cell phone in which they can read this kind of information. So I appreciate that y'all are working across agencies to get this information out, and encourage you to use some of the NGOs in country as well. My second question has to do with tourism. You know, I represent Las Vegas, and we are now starting to see foreign tourists come back. This is a large part of our business. Foreign tourists stay longer, they spend more. We saw where this is opening up. The president announced this within the last few days. Can you talk about some of the things that we're kind of doing in advance to accommodate foreign tourists? We saw the problems after 9/11, but now we've got a little bit more time to get ready, and people are anxious to travel. And when those borders open up, they're going to come to Las Vegas because we're better to go for a holiday after a year of frustration. Would you outline some of those things you're doing for customs and helping with that issue?
So, Congresswoman, thank you very much. The president did indeed announce in the last few days the fact that travel restrictions would be lifted with respect to international travel to the United States upon certain conditions. And our Office of Field Operations within Customs and Border Protection, located at the airports, will be ready to receive and process an increasing number of travelers. We are also working at Transportation Security Administration, TSA, to make the travel from the United States as facile and orderly and secure as possible. We are planning for what we hope to be a resumption of international travel and the influx of tourism, the tourism economy here in the United States.
Well, that's great, because we have the philosophy that a person's holiday begins the minute they leave home, and that includes all that experience through the airport. And we've heard some horror stories about waiting hours on the tarmac or in line to get through customs. So we want to be ready this time, and we appreciate any effort you can make for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Pursuant to today's order, the chair declares the committee in recess for 5 minutes. 5, 4, 3, 2. The committee will be in order. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, first, I'd like to ask you, Congressman Pfluger asked you a moment ago how many suspected terrorists have crossed the border, and you said you'd be glad to answer in a classified context. Why can't you answer that question in public?
Congressman, the information is indeed classified, and some of it is also law enforcement sensitive on a more general basis. These are determinations that are made across the agency, and I should note, if I may, Congressman, that I believe it was in late July that we provided a briefing to this committee with respect to the requested data. So it is information that we already have provided.
Thank you, sir. Now, let me ask you this. Many have commented, and sometimes it devolves into a debate over numbers, whether it's 1.3 million illegal crossings, who's recidivist, and how many really come in, whether who's really been let and released into the country. And of course, we have now the latest thing with the Haitians in the last week or so. Is all this the plan?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but let me say the following. The plan that we have is a multi-part plan. One is to address the root causes of irregular migration. Two is to ensure that there are safe, orderly, and humane pathways so people do not have to take the dangerous, perilous journey to make a claim of asylum that our laws that Congress passed recognize. And third is to rebuild our asylum system here in the United States. At the same time, Congressman, we do enforce our immigration laws. Those are not only the laws of humanitarian relief, but the laws of accountability for those who seek to enter illegally and do not have a claim for relief under law.
Thank you, sir. And I guess what I'm getting at is just that. Now that I look back at some of your testimony, when you were before us back in March, you went through something very similar. You talked about your plan to address, you always use the term address migrants at the border, and that you said we're executing on all fronts to address the situation at the border. When you spoke before Senate Appropriations Committee in May, you said something very similar. We have a 3-part plan, or 3 pillars to our plan, and you gave that again, more or less. You've done that repeatedly in testimony before Congress, that you have a plan underway to address the surge of migrants at the border. That comment was before the Senate Homeland Security Committee just in July 27. And so I guess what I want to understand is, are the results that we are seeing, are they the results of your plan? They're the planned results. Is that correct?
Congressman, let me give you a very important example of the execution.
Before you go off into an example, sir, could you give me a yes or no? Are these the results of your plan? Yes
Congressman, the plan is underway and is being executed. And as one of your colleagues mentioned, over the last month, we did see a decrease because we were implementing tools that are part of that plan. Back to my example of a measure that we have taken that is very significant and that, quite frankly, is unprecedented. What is not unprecedented is recognition of the problem in our asylum system, that it takes years and years between the time of encounter and the time of ultimate resolution.
Yeah,
and
at
one
this
of the
point,
things that we have done.
Let me ask you to sort of I'm sorry, I just have limited time. And I don't want to get into a sort of a down to the granular level of detail. You've made the point to these committees repeatedly that you have a plan and you're executing the plan. And sometimes I think we're talking past each other. I just like your confirmation, sir, that the results we're seeing at the border are the results of the execution of your plan. Is that a fair understanding?
No, it is not. It is a mischaracterization, Congressman. As I mentioned,
is your plan failing?
No, it is not. And as I mentioned, every time I have spoken of my plan, and I would welcome the opportunity, if not in today's testimony, but separately with you, to actually complete the answer that I was providing earlier, because it is It involves very important information with respect to that plan. The plan takes time, and we continue to exercise it thanks to the dedicated men and women of this department.
Do the results that you're seeing and their magnitude suggest to you that your plan is wrong, that your plan is ill-conceived and is plunging the nation into a crisis?
No.
All right, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I want to thank each and every of the witnesses for sharing your perspectives, your work, and your commitment. I am so touched by something that as a child I embraced and believed, and that is to give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. This country's greatness and true genius lies in its diversity. And I believe that. I am motivated by that. That is American to me. And so the conversations we have with regard to what happens at the border, what happens with refugees trying to get here, what's happening right now on the southern border with the Haitian communities, it concerns me tremendously, Mr. Mayorkas, that we would be sending them back to Haiti, some of them sending them for the first time in over 20 or 30 years, sending them to a country that has been just ravaged by earthquakes, ravaged by instability in its political and governmental realm, and dangerous with gangs. And so I just need to share that I believe our responsibility is to treat them humanely, to process them in a way that gives them the freedom and the opportunity to live in a healthy environment. Now, that may not just be the United States of America. We need to enlist our friends, our allies all around the world. And Mr. Mayorkas, I just need to say, I believe everything you say about your intentions with regard to doing our business humanely and respectfully on the borders and anywhere to keep our homeland free. But the images that I saw with regard to what was happening with Border Patrol employees whipping, I don't care if it were your belt or your reins or your what, but whipping Haitians is unconscionable, unacceptable, un-American. And I know that you're investigating it, but I tell you there's under no circumstances that those individuals are to be able to interact with other human beings ever again. They need to be released and they need to be held accountable. For all three of you, I want to just ask a question, which is really maybe a kind of bizarre question. Is there a hierarchy of concern with regard to the vulnerability of this country? Is it cybersecurity, interfering with our business and our supply lines and the things that we need? Is it foreign attacks coming from places that we know we've had folks attacking us before? Is it domestic terrorism? Is it domestic terrorism that represents ethnic and racial motivation? Is it domestic terrorism that is influenced by foreign terrorists? What are is there a hierarchy of concern? I want to hear that yes or no from all three of you. And then I need you to tell me, do you have the resources, all of the resources that you need to make us safe as we can humanly be with the work that is under your jurisdiction?
Congresswoman, maybe I'll answer first. We do have priorities, if you will, and I think you have accurately identified many of the priorities that we have in terms of protecting the homeland, and I'm sure those priorities are echoed by my colleagues in the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the National Counterterrorism Center. I also just want to remark that I well understand and appreciate the pain with which you made your initial remarks, Congresswoman.
Thank you, sir. Director Ray?
Thank you. I apologize. I missed probably the beginning of the question with the technical hiccup that we had, but picking up on what I think the question was, I would tell you that we have elevated racially and ethnically motivated violent extremism to our highest threat priority level, commensurate with ISIS and HVEs, homegrown violent extremists, and we did that back in June of 19. And the fact that we now have 2,700 domestic terrorism investigations accumulated over the last year and a half should speak volumes. As far as whether we have sufficient resources, there is, I think, in the budget pending for Congress, a much needed request for more resources because at the same time that we are having to increase and surge to domestic terrorism, the reality is the homegrown violent extremist threat has not subsided. And now, especially in the wake of events in Afghanistan, we need to be even more vigilant about foreign terrorist organizations. And last, I would add a category that hasn't gotten a lot of discussion in today's hearing, but a point that Director Abizaid made in her opening, which is we can't take our eye off the threat from Iran as well, Hezbollah, Quds Force, et cetera. So we have a full plate and we need all the help we can get, and we appreciate the committee's support.
Thank you. Director Abizaid, I want to ask you one question.
The gentlelady's time has expired, but she needs to answer
It's a 30, it's a 10-second question. I'm sorry, sir.
Gentlelady has 10 seconds.
Thank you.
10 seconds.
Thank you. Can you tell me what the motivation was for ISIS-K to perpetrate that attack on those leaving? We were evacuating. What was their point? Was their point just to show us that they exist and that they want to be a pain in our behind, or what? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. One, I think ISIS-K targeted our evacuation operations at HKIA in part because of the notoriety they would receive, because of how high profile it would be. But they also sought to embarrass the Taliban. ISIS-K is very focused on the Taliban. And given the Taliban's assertions of its own ability to provide security, they wanted to demonstrate that that was not in fact the case. That's our assessment as it stands now.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Iowa for 5 minutes. Ms. Miller Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you testified before this committee back in March. At that time, several members, including myself, asked you about COVID-19 testing protocols at the southern border. You said, and I quote, "We do support the testing of individuals, and that is indeed our policy, and we have implemented practices to execute on that policy." However, on September 10th, the DHS Office of Inspector General came out with a report that stated CBP does not conduct COVID-19 testing for migrants who enter CBP custody. And indeed, that's what I found at the 2 trips I made to the border. Instead, CBP relies on local public health systems to test symptomatic individuals. According to CBP officials, as a frontline law enforcement agency, it does not have the necessary resources to conduct such testing. I don't have to tell you that we're in a pandemic, Mr. Secretary. And I believe that testing of people coming across our southern border is one of the many keys to controlling the spread of COVID-19. That is why back in March, I introduced my first bill, the REACT Act, to require COVID-19 testing for all migrants. The OIG recommendation coming out of this September 10th report said DHS should reassess its COVID-19 response framework to identify areas for improvement to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. The report went on to say DHS leadership must commit to strengthening these COVID-19 preventive measures. Without stronger measures in place, DHS is putting its workforce, support staff, communities, and migrants at greater risk for contacting the virus. Additionally, with the predictable surge of Haitian migrants from South America, they may bring with them the Lambda variant, which is in South America at this time. These are certainly strong words coming out of the OIG. Additionally, the report makes observations regarding lack of social distancing, lack of mask wearing, and general overcrowding in facilities at the southern border, which would all combine to facilitate the spread of COVID-19. And not only COVID-19, I understand there is a measles outbreak at Fort Bliss. This is a huge problem, and one that the committee has been trying to get answers for during this entire year. And every time we ask the question, I feel like we get a different response. So I've got a number of questions, and because time is limited, I'm going to run through them so that you can answer them. If we're requiring air travelers to have a negative COVID-19 test before entry, why aren't we requiring the same of land travelers? If we are able to test Afghan peoples for COVID and vaccinate them not only for COVID, but measles, mumps, rubella, and polio, and other age-appropriate vaccinations which are required by the CDC, why is there a double standard along our southwest border? Do you agree with the IG's report? And the DHS did concur with 2 recommendations in that report, I believe. Do you agree that it's your responsibility to ensure that there are strong protocols at the border to mitigate the spread of COVID-19? Do you commit to implementing the IG's recommendations and identify ways to mitigate the spread of COVID-19? And do you commit to report back to this committee within a month on the progress the department has made at the border on testing for COVID-19? Thank you.
Congresswoman, may I seek your indulgence to obtain a transcript of all the questions that you've asked and answer them rapidly? I did not catch them all now. I will say, Congresswoman, that I do appreciate your focus on the communicable diseases with respect to migration, whether it's by air or by land, and in fact by sea. We have concurred in the Inspector General's recommendations. We have made changes to some of our COVID-19 protocols, and I will provide the requested information to you as rapidly as possible.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your respect for the questions I asked, but I've been asking these questions since March, and we've seen no policy or protocol changes, and yet we see a totally different response for Afghan refugees coming to this country than we do for those along at our southern border. To include which this massive spending bill that is coming out and we're expected to vote on doesn't have adequate resources for CBP to do its job. So I thank you so much for your testimony. I expect that we will see changes in protocol and policy, and I'll reintroduce what legislation I can to force those changes. Thank you so much, and Mr. Chair, I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes gentlelady from New York, Ms. Rice, for 5 minutes. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Dimmons, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all 3 of our witnesses for being here today. Thank you for the job that you do every day to keep us safe. I know you are not perfect, as you are frequently reminded. You have big jobs and awesome responsibility. But as members of Congress, so do we. And we are the lawmakers. And so I just would say to you that we all can work a little harder to be better partners and realize that we are all in the same boat, like it or not. And that boat, especially with this committee, is to lead in keeping our nation safe. We're a nation of laws at the border. We're a nation of laws on January 6th. Those were criminals and not tourists. And doggone it, we're a nation of laws regarding foreign entities. And if we would remember that, I think we all could be better partners and never risk our nation being attacked by anyone in such a cruel and vicious way. I want to just acknowledge the victims of 9/11 and the brave first responders on that day. And with that, Secretary Mayorkas, as many of my colleagues have noted today, DHS was created in response to 9/11. I remember it well. And over the last several months, we have held, as you constantly being reminded today, hearings on the mission and structure of the department and its ability to meet the threats of today and tomorrow. One concern raised on many occasions is that the department's mission has grown incredibly. Indeed, in just 2021, the department has led the federal government's response to the pandemic, every place, natural disasters all over our nation, stunning cybersecurity attacks, immigration enforcement, and resettlement of our Afghan allies. This is, of course, because, as one previous witness noted, DHS is an unmatched connector between federal resources and state and local authorities. Secretary, understanding that information and resource sharing to prevent attacks against our homeland is such an important function of the department. As the mission of the Department of Homeland Security and the responsibilities of its components grown too vast for one department? Mr. Secretary.
Congresswoman, I thank you so much for your question. I don't think so. We are fundamentally a department of partnerships. I think we are working now very cohesively across the department, across our different agencies and offices. And I think that we are working more collaboratively and closely with our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners than ever before. We have, for example, through the Office of the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, been disseminating critical products in partnership with the Federal Bureau of Investigation to our local first responder community so that they are very equipped and empowered to address the threats that they face in their respective communities. And I know you know this very, very well, given your lifelong dedication to the law enforcement and public safety mission. I think we're working very cohesively. We have a lot more to accomplish in that regard, and we're very focused on it.
Mr. Secretary, information sharing certainly was one of the major focuses, or I think recognized vulnerabilities 20 years ago. How would you say, as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, we're doing along the local, state, and federal level with information sharing?
I think, Congresswoman, if you would ask the state, local, tribal, territorial partners that we have, they would echo my assertion that we are doing better than ever before. We have not only issued an NTAS bulletin and renewed it several times, we've sent out multiple products in different forms. We are focused on real-time, actionable information in the hands of our partners to strengthen our homeland security. I think we're doing better than ever before, and we'll do better tomorrow than we are today.
Again, to all three of our witnesses, thank you for what you do to keep us safe every day. We are committed to joining you as effective partners in that effort. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, in your written testimony, you stated that DHS confronts complex challenges, including international and domestic terrorism, a global pandemic, malicious cyber activity, organized crime, catastrophic impacts of climate change, among others. And I understand that, they all are. I had to notice immediately that you didn't mention the crisis at our southern border as a challenge facing the department. Let me say to you, I understand your intentions, but you say that we are doing better today than we were. It seems to me we are doing worse today than we did yesterday, and I almost expect us to do even worse tomorrow than we are today. I don't agree with you. I think there are a lot of people using straight common sense that look at videos, that read reports, that look at information, that have spoken to law enforcement there. And we know that so far in 2021, there's over 1.3 million migrants have been apprehended at the American southern border, which is a 386% increase from this time last year. Let's call it what it is. This is a disaster. Additionally, August was the 6th straight month where we had 170,000 encounters at the border. That's unbelievable. It's been reported now, and we've seen all the pictures that we've got 9,000 migrants, give or take thousands, that may have entered the United States without being tested for COVID-19, with only being issued a notice to appear at an immigration hearing. And look what we see under the bridge in Del Rio: people bathing in the water, people obviously lacking hygienic, necessities, people who are sick, people who are involved with drugs. This is all there. This is nothing, I sit back, and again, as I said to you last time when we had this, it's like I'm in Bizarro world. I see it in front of me, you see it in front of you, but some people pretend not to see it. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to you, sir, but sometimes it seems like you don't want to see it. And the reality is, we talk about the underlying causes. So really, let's talk about this. What we're saying is, other countries have severe problems with poverty, education, nutrition, a host of areas. We understand that. But it is naive and arrogant of us to believe that we're going to fix all of that and make that all better, which throughout history we haven't even been able to do. And then that's going to stop the big push into the United States of illegal immigration in a timely way. That's nonsensical. The way that you do this is through the rule of law. The way that you do it is that you have a border. And when you have a border, you also have a border fence or a border wall. You have what you need. You have the proper amount of law enforcement to ensure that things don't get out of control. You ensure that you're reducing the amount of drugs that are coming into this country. And don't tell me that we're not getting more drugs because of this. We are. There's so much fentanyl now in our country. The numbers keep going up. It used to be you could kill every man, woman, and child 2 times over, then 3 times over, then 5 times over. I think the latest number is 7 times over, but we really don't know because it's just pouring in. We're using kids as drug mules. So we have sick people, we have drug-infested situations, we have a lack of hygiene, we have no rule of law at the border, we do the best we can, and certainly our men and women who work down there are. And then you say to me, it's better than it was when you were here last time. No, it is not better than it was last time. It's scarier and it's worse than it was last time. Texas can't absorb all these people. America can't absorb all these people. And we don't even know if they're healthy. We don't even know what problems we have. We haven't got, we really haven't taken enough care with evaluating each individual that's coming over. And we just can't. Undocumented migration is not appropriate. It's not how we work in America. We should change the immigration laws. I agree with that. But nevertheless, this is absolutely not the answer. So respectfully, again, I'm trying to be nice, but I'm angry and I'm tired. And Americans are angry and they're tired. We want to hear real answers. And please don't tell me we're going to make the whole world better in 6 months by addressing climate change and all their social problems that they have and all the military problems that they have. It's always been that people came to America because almost everywhere else is much worse and America is much better. But we have to have control of the situation. This is nonsensical and it's damaging and it's disturbing and it's hurting our people and it's hurting our country, and it should be one of our #1 priorities. So tell me, do you really believe that it's better now? Do you personally take any responsibility for this crisis?
Congressman, I think you've said quite a number of things, and I'd really like to speak with you fulsomely about everything you've said. You mentioned something that I think deserves particular emphasis, and that is you referenced our broken immigration system and the need to fix it. And that has been an enduring problem. The one thing that there is unanimity about is the fact that we have a broken immigration system. It is most unfortunate that we have not fixed it over many, many years. I hope we do. Because
Secretary, I
that
understand.
fundamental.
Forgive me for interrupting. I agree with you, but right now we have an immediate crisis. We have an immediate situation. So, it's like saying if a war breaks out, well, we've really got to work on human nature and ensure that we work together more as human beings. I agree. But the reality is we have a crisis now.
I recognize the gentlelady from California.
Thank you.
Ms. Barragan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panelists and Mr. Secretary for being with us today. I want to follow up with the Title 42 questions. Every day, hundreds of thousands of people cross the border, whether it's students, whether it's business people, whether it's folks seeing doctors, but hundreds of thousands are crossing the border. Mr. Secretary, what's the difference between those people crossing the border and asylum seekers crossing the border, which we're now citing to Title 42 to deport?
Congresswoman, I'm not exactly sure what particular differences you're focused upon, but as you know,
Well,
we are exercising in between the ports of entry the CDC's Public Health Authority under Title 42.
Okay, so is there any difference between people that are crossing, the hundreds of people crossing the border every day, students, business people, and asylum seekers, other than they're just asylum seekers?
I'm sorry, Congresswoman, I don't quite understand your question. Yes, I mean, there are many differences between migration, the movement of people through a port of entry, and the encountering of an individual in between the ports of entry. There are numerous differences between those two phenomena in a number of respects, legally, from a public health perspective, a whole host operationally. I'm just not quite sure what you're focused upon. I apologize.
Well, I'm focused on the fact that this is a discriminatory policy that is implemented because people are asylum seekers, because the public health crisis does not discriminate whether you're an asylum seeker or whether you're not an asylum seeker. So I just think it's a discriminatory practice. And I just want to continue to encourage the administration to end the use of Title 42 in a day and age where we have vaccines and we have requirements we can put in place for people to get vaccines. Mr. Secretary, moving on, how does CBP choose which Haitians will be expelled via repatriation flights and which individuals will be processed into the United States?
Congresswoman, our policy is to employ Title 42, the CDC's Public Health Authority, to the fullest extent possible in light of the CDC's public health assessment and the public health imperative. It is a matter of, for example, our operational capacity, the willingness of a partner country and its capacity to receive individuals. There are a host of factors. In addition, there are very limited exceptions to our Title 42 authority. For example, as I think you recognize, we do not enforce it with respect to unaccompanied children. That was a policy that was implemented very early on. There is a Convention Against Torture exception. There are individuals who have severe and acute vulnerabilities that we recognize. And I would be pleased to provide more information in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'd like to talk a little bit now about seaports. Nationwide, seaports are seeing record high levels of cargo volumes and increases of container ships, resulting in port congestion. Ships with containerized cargo are stalled in marine terminals, and vessels spend days at anchor waiting to load or unload at port of terminals. In fact, the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles in my district this week had 65 ships at anchor waiting to unload cargo. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, it was uncommon for more than one ship to wait to unload. Unfortunately, port congestion is expected to be an ongoing challenge. Can you describe the challenges that port congestion might pose to maritime port security?
So, if I may, Congresswoman, the greatest challenge with respect to port congestion is the obstacle to the very facile movement of goods through those ports and serving the economic engine. This is a consequence, as we know all too well, of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Office of Field Operations, the United States Coast Guard, all our services are very focused on maritime security on the one hand, and of course, the facile movement of lawfully imported goods to the United States. We're very focused on this.
Mr. Secretary, I have to say I'm a little disappointed. The question was very specific about what challenges that congestion might pose to maritime port security. I hope you will follow up, given that I represent a port and ports are very important, that I get an answer to that's specific. I want to know what the security issue is from congestion. What you said it to me was just restating the problem. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on Representative Miller-Meek's line of questioning, these are for Secretary Mayorkas. Mr. Secretary, the last time you testified before the committee, you admitted to this committee that your agency had released migrants who have tested positive for COVID-19. Since then, multiple reports have indicated that thousands of COVID positive migrants have been released from DHS custody. In addition, the DHS Office of Inspector General released a report highlighting that your department has failed to take sufficient COVID-19 preventative measures at the border, which puts the DHS workforce and communities at unnecessary risk of being exposed to COVID-19. So to me, it is clear that your department either does not have a strategy or it is not effectively executing a strategy that will effectively mitigate the risks of COVID-19 at the border. Why is that?
Congressman, we do have a strategy. We concurred in the recommendations of the Inspector General's office. We are implementing those recommendations. We have made changes, and I can walk through the processes that we employ currently with respect to the different populations of migrants whom we are encountering at the border.
Okay,
First,
well,
without
let me ask you this.
children.
If you say
Secondly,
you say you have a strategy and you are implementing it, when will final implementation of the strategy be complete? Because, go ahead.
We are working as quickly as possible to implement the recommendations of the Office of Inspector General. Let me give you one
what is the time frame? When will it be complete?
I will speak with our Chief Medical Officer and I will report back to you.
So you don't know?
I will speak with our Chief Medical Officer, Congressman, and I will.
Okay. So there's it's having a plan and executing the plan, all right, effectively executing the plan is very different. So it's pretty clear to me that the administration is not truly serious in addressing this matter. And I would like to remind the Secretary that according to your website, 11,125 CBP employees have tested positive for COVID-19 and 43 CBP agents have died from the virus so far. So I would urge my Democrat colleagues to join me in co-sponsoring my bill, HR 2076, the COVID-19 Border Protection Act. And this bill would require DHS, in consultation with HHS, to develop and submit a comprehensive plan of action to test and quarantine every migrant at the southern border and execute on that plan. And I would also, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record an article dated August the 4th that highlights the number of positive COVID-19 cases. And it's titled, Texas Border City Says More Than 7,000 COVID Positive Migrants Released Since February, 1,500 in the last week alone. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent for that to be added.
May I say something, Congressman, because you touch upon a very important subject that we have focused upon, and that is the health and well-being of our workforce. We launched Operation Vaccinate Our Workforce to make sure that vaccinations are accessible to our frontline personnel. That yielded a tremendous increase in the percentage of our workforce that was indeed vaccinated.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that information. So let me ask you this. How long will it take you to fully implement the MPP, a Migrant Protection Protocol program? Can you give me a time frame on that?
I cannot, because we are reliant on our partner, Mexico, to implement that program. That is a bilateral agreement. We are working with Mexico to implement that program.
So
Now, if I
until
may-
so what I'm gathering then is that you have no idea when that program will be fully implemented.
The Congressman, let me be unequivocally clear.
No. Just tell me yes
No.
or no. You do or not?
We are seeking to implement that program and working to implement it in
Okay,
good
thank you.
faith
Then
as we are required to do
I'm
so.
reclaiming my time. I have a question for Director Ray and Director Abizaid. Do we know the identity of the Kabul airport bomber? And do we have any information that this person was previously incarcerated at Bagram Air Base? If I could get each one of you, Director Ray and Director Abizaid, to comment on that, please.
I know we've identified certain individuals who we believe to be associated with the bombing. I'm not sure, as I sit here right now, whether that's information that is sufficiently developed to be able to share in a public hearing. So let me see if there's more information we can supply to you as a follow-up, because it may require classified setting. And then the second part is there may be an ongoing investigation that might be impacted. So let me look into that and we will circle back to you.
Okay, Director Abizaid.
Yeah, I mean, I would associate myself with Director Ray's comments. We do have an assessment along those lines. The ability to share in this forum is something that I don't have information, but I absolutely will follow up and work with our colleagues in the FBI to provide the information, whether in a classified setting or if it's declassified after this hearing.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your commitment in that.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair, recognize the lady from Florida, Ms. Kamek, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing before us here today. My colleagues have discussed a number of U.S. national security concerns, and I share those same concerns. There's no doubt that our homeland faces more threats than in any time since 9/11. The list of threats is long and far-reaching. But today, I would like to focus on the crisis on our southwest border. Now, Secretary Mayorkas, seeing as how this is our third time meeting to discuss this issue, I would like you to answer my questions with a simple yes or no as to not waste time. I would also caution you to refrain from making promises about providing us members of Congress with additional information in a timely manner, because we have just recently received information from a March 17th hearing. In fact, I received the answers to that March 17th hearing on August 24th, 161 days after we requested that information. You can imagine how frustrating that probably is as a member of Congress tasked with oversight of the executive branch. So with that in mind, I'd like to jump right in to a series of questions. Can you please provide me with the name of the individual who made the decision to suspend flights to Haiti the first week of September?
Congresswoman, that was a collective decision. And that was a temporary, if I may say, not cancel, but postpone temporarily flights. And
did you make the recommendation?
I'm sorry, and those were few in number.
Did you yourself make the recommendation to suspend the flights?
It is my responsibility as the Secretary of Homeland Security. I own that.
So yes, okay, thank you. Yes or no, you have committed to briefing my colleagues in a classified setting on a number of known terrorists that have crossed into the United States or attempted to. Now, I think we can all agree that terrorists on the known watch list crossing into the United States is an immediate threat. So will you commit to that briefing for this committee before the end of this month?
Congresswoman, we will provide another briefing to this committee. I understand that we provided that briefing previously in July. If I may
by
say
the end of this month?
I will not myself be able to do that, but I'm sure my team would be, Congresswoman. May I say something with respect to?
Well, actually, I have a very limited amount of time, so I need to get through this because there's just a litany of issues. Now, how many DHS personnel, including CBP and USBP personnel, have been pulled from their duties related to the southwest border in order to manage the processing of Afghans into the United States?
So I believe that over 20 individuals from the United States Border Patrol have been directed to the transit countries to assist. I can get you a complete breakdown of the population of DHS personnel that have been dedicated to the screening and vetting of Afghan nationals before they arrive here in the United States.
I appreciate that. And with regard to the agents that have been pulled off the line to process and essentially babysit, can you give me a percentage of how many of your agents are now engaging in that activity?
Oh, I disagree with that characterization.
I didn't ask if you disagreed. I asked for the percentage of how many, given a percentage of your agents have been pulled off of their primary in law enforcement duties.
Congresswoman, I just disagree with the question. I'm sorry, you're assuming facts. We have multiple.
Secretary Mayorkas, I'm going to have to reclaim my time, and I can answer that question for you. In one of your busiest sectors, the RGV sector, 75% of your Border Patrol agents have been pulled off the line to babysit and process. That is a disgrace. I also want to make mention that as we are sitting here, several of your agents are watching this hearing, hearing your commentary. You were exceptionally quick to judge one of your own agents and the mounted patrol, yet you have given zero time to the number of suicides and agents who have passed away because of contact and contracting COVID with their day-to-day operations. That to me is shameful. Now, I want to go to my colleague, Representative Pfluger's comments. He asked you if you thought that the border was secure. In your own words, you stated that the border is, quote, no less secure than the previous administration. Mr. Guest previously provided data earlier in the hearing that your agency shows that it is in fact a historic level. We have 308,000 gotaways, 75% of your agents are processing and babysitting in one of your busiest sectors. We have a record number of retirements, historic level of narcotics that have come across the border, and you still stand by your statement, yes or no, that the border is secure?
Yes, and if I may, your initial assertion, Congresswoman, was profoundly offensive and wrong.
Well, this is now the second time that you have basically called me disrespectful. I believe in our first meeting you did. But
young lady's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Meyer, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for being here today. Ms. Kamek touched upon something that I just want to ask briefly about, follow-up to information. Representative Correa and I sent a letter to DHS addressed to you on September 16th. So this is from both the chairman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Oversight, Management, and Accountability, Mr. Correa, and also myself as ranking member, asking for specific information on how many of the Afghan evacuees that we have brought to the U.S. right now, how many of them are special immigrant visa holders or dependents, how many are permanent residents or dependents, American citizens or dependents, ANSF personnel who assisted in the evacuation or dependents, the local embassy staff at Kabul or dependents, and how many are other Afghans? Because I know we've seen some figures floating around that suggest that over 85% of those who were evacuated were neither SIVs, American citizens, or permanent residents. Obviously, it's a very fluid picture. Are you prepared to answer the questions we posed in that letter? Are you prepared to answer that today, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, I am. And if I may, I'll provide the answer in percentage form, Congressman. So we have admitted into the United States over 60,000 Afghan nationals. Approximately 7% of that population are United States citizens. Approximately 6% are lawful permanent residents. Approximately 3% are special immigrant visa holders. The balance is a combination, if I may, Congressman, a combination of special immigrant visa applicants whose applications have not been finalized for approval, locally employed staff, individuals who would qualify under, for example, P1, P2 refugee status, and then other vulnerable Afghans, as you have identified, journalists, human rights activists, etc.
And if we could get, I appreciate the specificity in the 7%, 6%, 3%. Is my understanding that those numbers also accompany the dependents of the principal holder?
Yes, Congressman, and we do not have a breakdown of the balance of that population, if you will. We do not yet have that breakdown, that data.
If you could get that to us by October 1st, as requested in the letter, that'd be greatly appreciated, Mr. Secretary. And I also, touching on the border real quickly, I mean, looking at the numbers we have, you're no longer, or the administration's line is no longer that this is seasonal, increases, right? I mean, we're at structurally different numbers coming across, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that something that you are satisfied by? Is this a tolerable situation? I was appreciative of the emotion and enthusiasm you talked about, the investigation you'll be doing into the photos that we saw. Will there be an appropriate attempt to try to close the border or to try to reduce that flow or get us down from, again, I mean, just incredibly high numbers. I'm looking at the fiscal year Southwest land border encounters by month. I mean, it was that ramp up in February, and it has just stayed above that, 175 level consistently. Are we doing anything to try to get that number back down, to try to regain control of the border?
We most certainly are, Congressman. We are doing a number of different things to address irregular migration and the number of individuals who are traveling north to our southern border ill-advisedly, perilously, and unsuccessfully. We are doing a number of things, and I've spoken about this with respect to the root causes, the safe, orderly, and humane pathways, rebuilding processes here in the United States.
Has any of that had a demonstrable impact on being able to reduce those numbers, sir?
Well, we actually have recently seen a reduction in numbers. We hope that trend continues. We are employing tools, and we are also fundamentally hopeful that the broken immigration system will be fixed through legislation.
Okay. And just, I think that reduction was from July was 213,000, August was 208,000. So still quadruple what it was in prior years, but I guess a reduction of, a few percent is something. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Katko for holding this important hearing. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and Director Ray and Director Mizad. Welcome so much. Thank you for your service, and I really look forward to our work together to help protect our great country. As we sit here today, 20 years after 9/11, it's clear that we face a much different threat landscape today than the one that presented itself 2 decades ago. We've seen the rise of a diffuse domestic and homegrown terrorist movement, especially white supremacists and other racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists. As of last year, the FBI had more than 1,000 pending domestic terrorism investigations in all 50 states across 56 field offices. And earlier this year, in recognition of these threats, the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and National Counterterrorism Center, agencies our witnesses today represent, were each charged with fulfilling specific goals under the first ever National Strategic for Countering Domestic Terrorism. Given these pending threats, it's critical that Congress enacts reforms to prevent the rising threat of domestic terrorism. Mr. Secretary, in July, this committee approved my bill, the Darren Drake Act. It's named in memory of a resident from my district, Darren Drake of New Milford, a victim of October 2017 New York City West Side Highway terrorist truck attack. The bipartisan bill will direct the Secretary of Homeland Security to develop and disseminate best practices for rental companies and dealers to report suspicious behavior to law enforcement agencies at the point of sale of a rental vehicle to prevent and mitigate acts of terrorism using motor vehicles. Mr. Secretary, how will these provisions help protect communities, in your opinion, from future terrorist attacks? And what other reforms are most needed to prevent domestic terror incidents like those we've seen in recent years?
Congressman, your bill is extremely important because it speaks of a fundamental need. Not only the dissemination of information to state, local, tribal, territorial law enforcement, but the dissemination to the private sector and the sharing of best practices. And we are working to implement that very thoroughly. I think it's a very important measure, and we have designed the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnership precisely to accomplish that mission, to equip and empower all of society to work within the communities to address this increased threat.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Dr. Abdizad, in February, along with Representatives Brian Fitzpatrick, Andre Carson, and Chris Smith, I introduced the bipartisan Saraceni Enhanced Aviation Act of 2021 to require the installation of secondary cockpit barriers on all commercial passenger aircraft to prevent terrorist attacks similar to 9/11. The bill mandates the installation of inexpensive, lightweight wire mesh gates between the passenger cabin and cockpit door, blocking access to flight decks whenever the cockpit door is open during flight on all existing aircrafts. Director, looking back on the 20 years since 9/11, how can we prevent measures like this one help further protect American citizens? And in your view, what more is needed?
Thank you very much for the question. In general, the threats to aviation security are from foreign terrorist organizations in particular remain of concern even here 20 years later. The enhancements that have happened in the intervening time have certainly protected us, and the establishment of organizations like TSA, like DHS, like NCTC have all contributed to that. That said, every additional step is that would further improve security is something that that we think will deter terrorist capability with regard to aviation security or other tactics they may use. And so we appreciate the effort that that you've gone through to do that.
Director, do you think we need that secondary barrier on all planes, not just the new commercial ones, but existing flights?
I'm not intimately familiar with the legislation or specifically the assessment that would lead us to say that that is absolutely necessary. I would just say as a general matter, it sounds reasonable. I'm happy to look at it and run it against what we know of terrorist tactics and capabilities and come back to you on that.
Thanks. It's the only recommendation in the 9/11 Commission report that is yet to be implemented. It's right now we use drink carts on many planes, and the flight attendants have to stand there when the cockpit door is open. There's been plenty of research at the FAA on this and other areas about the threat to our cockpits and to our airplanes about this. So yeah, I would love to follow up with you on this because I think it's critically important based on the research and the evidence and the 9/11 Commission report that we get this done. And there's absolutely no reason why we would leave this vulnerability open. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Letourneau, for 5 minutes. Gentleman needs to unmute himself. Like we're having some technical difficulties with you. We're still not able to hear you, Mr. Letourneau. Stand by, we're trying to correct it.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman?
Well,
okay.
You own. Go ahead.
Secretary Mayorkas. As has been cited throughout this hearing today, Customs and Border Patrol has encountered 208,887 migrants on the southwest border this past August, a 317% increase compared to the prior year. CBP is currently encountering over 5,000 more individuals per day than in August 2020. And we have seen 6 straight months with over 170,000 encounters. Your Inspector General also just released a report highlighting the fact that your agency has failed to ensure sufficient COVID preventative measures at the border. And after nearly 3 decades of service at CBP, former Border Chief Rodney Scott stated that DHS is seeing terrorists cross our border, quote, at a level we have never seen before. This is absolutely unacceptable, and this disaster must be addressed immediately. What specifically are you doing at DHS to ensure that our borders are secure and that Americans are kept safe amidst all of this chaos?
If I may, Congressman, I can spell out quite a number of measures that we are taking. Let me focus, if I may, on August. The number of encounters that you identify does not reflect the number of individuals encountered, because we do have a level of recidivism there. You cite a 208,000 figure. In fact, the unique encounters, the number of different individuals encountered in August, was 156,641. So we've taken a number of measures, enforcement measures. For example, we've increased the number of lateral flights from one area of the border to another, and then we have the removal flights leave from that second processing area into the interior of Mexico to make recidivism more difficult and to ease the processing line and facilitate it. That is one example of a measure that we have taken. We have, in fact, instituted a policy to criminally prosecute recidivist individuals who've been removed previously. We are working with the Northern Triangle countries to receive more individuals more rapidly so that we can effect removals more. Those are some examples of the measures that we are taking from an enforcement perspective. We also have an obligation, albeit in a COVID-19 environment, because we are employing the CDC's Title 42 Public Health Authority. We do have an obligation to enforce all laws. That is also not only the laws of accountability, but the laws of humanitarian relief. Those are equally on the books as well. And many of the individuals whom we encounter claim asylum and have a right to have those asylum claims heard as our laws provide.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Could you provide what percentage of migrants have been processed through Title 42 as opposed to Title 8?
So let's take a look, if I may, Congressman, at the August numbers. So of the numbers that I have indicated, the 93,414 have been processed for expulsion under Title 42, and 115,473 have been processed for expulsion under Title 8.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The Secretary has reiterated during this hearing his willingness to provide requested updates to members in an appropriate setting. We will work and coordinate that with the Secretary. And if at all possible, Mr. Director, we might try to get you there too, given some of the information you were not able to provide at this hearing, so that the members can have as full a view of what the landscape looks like in a classified and unclassified setting. So we'll try to work with everybody, as well as our third witness, who perhaps can help us on the international front to tie some of the areas together too. But for sure, we'll get FBI and DHS, and obviously, if we need to include others, we will. I thank the witnesses for their testimony and members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask you to respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, I also include in the record a letter from the Jewish Federation on the subject of today's hearing. The chair reminds that the committee's record will remain open for 10 business days. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.